Single Dad destroyed his back, lifting a woman's wrecked car. She was the governor's secret sister, but when the cameras showed up, they called him a hero until the truth about who he saved turned his whole town against him. And one act of kindness sparked a secret that could bring down the most powerful man in the state. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Ben Carter's weathered hands trembled slightly as he turned the key in the ancient lock of Carter's Auto and Repair. The familiar click echoed through the empty parking lot, mixing with the soft patter of early evening raindrops that had begun their gentle assault on the cracked asphalt. His back twinged as he straightened up, a sharp, unwelcome reminder of countless hours spent bent over engines and transmissions, of 25 years crawling under cars and lifting heavy parts that his body was beginning to protest. The fluorescent sign above the shop flickered weakly, its buzzing electrical hum competing with the rain's whisper. The red letters spelling Carter's Auto and Repair cast an intermittent glow across the weathered building's facade, where paint peeled like old scabs and rust stains traced brown tears down the metal siding. Ben pulled his worn denim jacket tighter around his shoulders, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion settle into his bones. His mind was already racing ahead to home, where Grace would be waiting with her homework spread across their small kitchen table, probably sketching in the margins of her math assignments while she worked. "Lord, give me strength," he whispered, a habit he'd picked up from Sarah during their 18 years of marriage. The words came automatically now, as natural as breathing, though some days he wondered if anyone was listening. The thought of his late wife sent a familiar ache through his chest, sharper and more persistent than his perpetually sore back, deeper than the bone-tired fatigue that seemed to live in his muscles these days. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl that seemed to roll across the Tennessee hills like an approaching freight train. Ben climbed into his old Ford pickup, the truck's door protesting with a metallic groan as it opened. The cracked vinyl seat had been patched with duct tape in 3 places, and the dashboard bore the scars of decades of hard-use coffee stains, scratches from tools, and a spiderweb crack across the speedometer that he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. The dashboard clock blinked 9:47 p.m. in angry red digits, another late night in a string of late nights that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. The truck's engine coughed to life with the reluctant wheeze of an old man getting out of bed, and Ben sat for a moment in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Raindrops collected on the windshield like tears, each one catching the weak light from the parking lot's single working lamppost. An unpaid electric bill lay crumpled in his jacket pocket, next to a reminder notice for Grace's upcoming college application fees. The numbers on both papers seemed to blur together in his mind, always more going out than coming in, always another month where he had to choose between fixing the truck and buying groceries, between paying the rent and keeping the lights on. The wipers squeaked across the glass as Ben pulled onto the empty street, their rubber blades leaving streaks that caught the light like battle scars. Main Street stretched before him, its sparse streetlights casting weak pools of yellow light that barely penetrated the thickening curtain of rain. The truck's heater wheezed to life, blowing warm air that carried the faint but persistent scent of motor oil that never quite washed out of his clothes, no matter how many times Grace ran them through their ancient washing machine. "Just keep moving forward," he muttered to himself. Another one of Sarah's sayings that had become his daily mantra. 5 years since cancer took her, and sometimes it felt like yesterday. He could still see her smile lighting up their bedroom in the early morning, hear her laugh echoing through the house when Grace told one of her silly jokes, feel her hand squeezing his as she made him promise to take care of their little girl. Some nights, he lay awake wondering if he was keeping that promise well enough. The road curved away from town, winding through dense Tennessee forest, where ancient oaks and maples pressed close to the asphalt like silent sentinels. Their branches formed a canopy overhead that blocked out most of the sky, creating a tunnel of shadows that seemed to swallow his headlights. Ben's back protested as he shifted in his seat, trying to find a position that didn't send shooting pains down his left leg. 25 years of lifting engines and crawling under cars had taken their toll, leaving him with a collection of aches and pains that served as a daily reminder of his mortality. But he couldn't afford to slow down, not with Grace's future hanging in the balance like a question mark he wasn't sure he could answer. The rain intensified, drumming against the truck's roof with increasing urgency. Each drop sounded like a tiny fist knocking for attention, and the noise filled the cab with a steady percussion that almost drowned out the engine's labored breathing. Through the blur of his wipers, Ben caught glimpses of his reflection in the rearview mirror, gray threading through his dark hair like silver wire, lines deepening around his eyes like cracks in dried earth. Sarah used to tell him those wrinkles were laugh lines, evidence of a life filled with joy. But lately, they felt more like worry lines, carved by sleepless nights and endless concerns about money and Grace's future. "You're doing just fine, Daddy," Grace had said just that morning, catching him staring at their dwindling bank account on the laptop's glowing screen. She had Sarah's intuition, that uncanny ability to sense when his spirits needed lifting, when the weight of responsibility threatened to crush him. Her small hand had rested on his shoulder with a warmth that reminded him so much of her mother it took his breath away. But she shouldn't have to carry that burden, shouldn't have to be the one offering comfort when she was still just a child herself. She should be focused on her art, her dreams, her bright future, not worrying about her old man's struggles with bills and broken down equipment. Lightning flashed across the sky, a brilliant white fork that illuminated the dense wall of trees on either side of the narrow road. For a split second, the forest was transformed into a stark black and white photograph, every branch and leaf standing out in sharp relief before plunging back into darkness. The thunder that followed was closer now, rolling across the sky like bowling balls in Heaven's Alley, each rumble seeming to shake the truck's frame. Ben leaned forward, squinting through the rain-streaked windshield as the drops came harder, turning from gentle taps into an angry assault that overwhelmed his aging wipers. His shoulders ached from tension, muscles knotted tight as piano wire, and he forced himself to loosen his white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. The plastic was worn smooth from years of use, molded to the shape of his hands like an old friend. The familiar weight of it should have been comforting, but tonight everything felt uncertain, as if the very ground beneath his wheels might give way at any moment. "Walk by faith, not by sight," he recited, the words Sarah had painted on a small wooden sign that still hung in their kitchen. But these days, his faith felt as worn as his work boots, thin in places where doubt had rubbed through the leather of his beliefs. The Lord had carried them through Sarah's passing, had given him strength when he thought he might break completely. But sometimes Ben wondered if he was failing the test of raising Grace alone, if his efforts were falling short of what she deserved. The thought of disappointing either of them, his daughter or his wife, made his chest tight with a panic that no amount of prayer seemed to ease. The road curved sharply ahead, following the natural contours of the hillside in a particularly treacherous S-bend that had claimed its share of victims over the years. Local newspapers still ran stories about accidents on this stretch of highway, usually involving drivers who took the curves too fast or lost control in bad weather. Ben automatically eased off the gas pedal, his mechanic's mind instinctively calculating the dangerous combination of rain-slicked asphalt, poor visibility, and the steep drop-off that lay just beyond the guardrail. The forest seemed to press closer here, as if the trees were leaning in to watch what happened on the narrow ribbon of road that cut through their domain. Spanish moss hung from the lower branches like tattered curtains, swaying in the wind and creating ghostly shapes that danced at the edge of his vision. The rain drummed harder now, each drop exploding against his windshield like tiny water balloons, creating a constant blur that his wipers couldn't quite clear. Suddenly, bright headlights pierced the darkness ahead, twin beams cutting through the rain like searchlights. But something was wrong. They were moving far too fast for the conditions, weaving slightly, as if the driver was struggling to maintain control. Ben's heart leaped into his throat as he watched the approaching vehicle, a sleek sedan that seemed to be racing against the storm itself. Time seemed to slow, as reality shifted into that strange, crystalline clarity that comes in moments of crisis. The sedan began to fishtail on the wet road, its rear end sliding sideways as the driver overcorrected. Ben could almost feel the other driver's panic, could imagine hands gripping the steering wheel as the car began its deadly dance with physics and gravity. The vehicle's tires screamed against the pavement, a high-pitched shriek that cut through the thunder like a banshee's wail. The sedan's headlights swept across Ben's face like interrogation lamps as it careened past him, close enough that he could see the terror in the driver's silhouette. His mouth opened in a silent prayer as he watched through his side mirror, helpless and horrified, as the car spun completely around and slammed sideways into a massive oak tree. The impact sounded like the world breaking a tremendous crash of crunching metal and exploding glass that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Ben's foot hit the brake pedal hard, his truck's tires sliding slightly on the wet road as he fought to bring the vehicle to a controlled stop. The acrid smell of burning brake pads filled the cab, mixing with the metallic taste of adrenaline that flooded his mouth. Through his rearview mirror, he could see smoke beginning to rise from the crumpled vehicle, a thin gray stream that quickly thickened in the rain, creating an ominous cloud that seemed to glow from within. "Dear God," he breathed, his hands shaking as he threw the truck into reverse. The engine whined in protest as he backed up along the narrow road, using his mirrors to navigate toward the wreckage. The scene behind him looked like something from his worst nightmares, twisted metal wrapped around unforgiving wood, steam rising from a destroyed engine, and somewhere in that horrific tangle of steel and glass, someone who desperately needed help. The rain continued to fall, washing the blood from broken glass and carrying away the last traces of a normal evening that had suddenly become anything but ordinary. The rain pelted Ben's face as he stumbled from his truck, his boots slipping in the mud. "Hello, can anybody hear me?" His voice cracked as he shouted into the darkness. Lightning flashed, illuminating the wreckage in stark detail. The sedan's hood was accordion folded against the massive oak, steam hissing from the crumpled engine block. "Is anyone there?" Ben called again, his heart pounding as he approached the vehicle. Through the spider-webbed windshield, he could make out a slumped figure in the driver's seat. A woman, maybe in her 40s, lay unconscious against the steering wheel. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead. Ben's mechanic's eye took in the scene in seconds. The impact had pushed the driver's side door against the tree, making it impossible to open. The passenger door was crushed inward, the metal groaning under the strain. The smell of gasoline grew stronger with each passing moment. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Ben pressed his face against the broken window. The woman didn't respond, but he could see her chest rising and falling shallowly. She was alive, for now. He grabbed the passenger door handle and pulled with all his might. The metal creaked, but didn't budge. Panic rose in his throat as he noticed smoke starting to curl from under the hood, mixing with the steam in the rain. The acrid smell made his eyes water. "Lord, give me strength," Ben muttered, running back to his truck. He yanked open the toolbox in the bed, sending wrenches clattering as he searched for his tire iron. His fingers closed around the cold metal just as another flash of lightning illuminated the scene. The smoke was thickening now. Ben's soaked clothes clung to his body as he rushed back to the car, tire iron clutched in his trembling hands. He wedged it under the passenger door frame, using a piece of broken branch as a fulcrum. Come on," he growled, pushing down on the makeshift lever. His back screamed in protest, but the door shifted slightly. Encouraged, Ben repositioned the tire iron and threw his full weight against it. Pain shot through his spine like electricity, but he couldn't stop. Not with a life hanging in the balance. The door groaned and bent outward, creating a small gap. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Ben dropped the tire iron and planted his feet firmly in the mud. He dug his fingers into the gap and pulled, using every ounce of strength he possessed. His back felt like it was being torn apart. Sweat mixed with rain on his face as he strained against the metal. "Please, Lord," he grunted through clenched teeth. "Just a little more." The door suddenly gave way with a screech of tortured metal. The force sent Ben stumbling backward, but he caught himself before he fell. Smoke was pouring from under the hood now, and he could see the orange flicker of flames through the gaps in the crumpled metal. Ben lunged forward, reaching across the passenger seat to the unconscious woman. He fumbled with her seatbelt, his wet fingers slipping on the buckle until it finally released. The smoke was getting thicker, burning his eyes and throat. "I've got you," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. He wrapped his arms around her shoulders and waist, trying to pull her toward him as gently as possible. His back spasmed violently, nearly causing him to drop her, but he held on. The heat from the engine compartment was intense now. Ben could hear the crackle of flames over the sound of rain and thunder. With a final surge of desperate strength, he dragged the woman free of the wreck. His legs gave out, and they both tumbled to the ground several feet from the car. Ben's vision blurred with pain as he rolled onto his side, gasping for breath. Every movement sent white-hot agony through his spine. Through the haze, he was dimly aware of flames engulfing the front of the sedan. A soft moan beside him caught his attention. The woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening with panic. She tried to sit up but fell back with a whimper. "Don't move," Ben managed to say between ragged breaths. "Help's coming." He could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. The woman's hand found his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that startled him. "Don't," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm and approaching sirens. "Don't tell anyone who I am." Ben stared at her in confusion, but before he could respond, his back seized again. He collapsed onto the muddy ground, darkness creeping at the edges of his vision. The last thing he saw was the orange glow of the burning car reflecting off the falling rain, and then everything went black. The steady beep of a heart monitor pulled Ben from the fog. His eyelids felt heavy as he tried to focus on the white ceiling tiles above. The sharp smell of antiseptic filled his nose, and something rigid wrapped around his torso made it difficult to move. "Dad?" Grace's voice came from beside him, thick with worry. "Are you awake?" Ben turned his head slowly, wincing at the stiffness in his neck. His 16-year-old daughter sat in a pale blue hospital chair, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, eyes red from crying. Next to her, Pastor Will Harper's weathered face broke into a relieved smile. "Welcome back, son," Pastor Will said softly. "You gave us quite a scare." Ben tried to shift position, but a wave of pain shot through his lower back. He gasped, and Grace jumped up, reaching for his hand. "Try not to move, Dad," she pleaded. "The doctor said you need to stay still." The events of the night came rushing back. The rain, the crash, the woman trapped in the car, the accident, Ben croaked, his throat dry. "Is she?" "She's alive, thanks to you," Pastor Will assured him. "They've got her in another wing of the hospital." A nurse bustled in, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum floor. "Good to see you're with us, Mr. Carter. I'm Nancy." She checked his vitals and adjusted his IV line. "How's your pain level, on a scale of 1 to 10? 6, Ben admitted, though it felt more like an 8. He'd never been good at complaining. "I'll get you something for that," Nancy said. "The doctor will be in shortly to discuss your condition." As if on cue, a tall man in a white coat entered, carrying a clipboard. "Mr. Carter, I'm Dr. Matthews. We've done some scans while you were out, and I need to be straight with you about what we found." Ben's stomach tightened. "How bad is it?" "You've severely strained the muscles in your lower back and herniated 2 discs," Dr. Matthews explained, pointing to an X-ray on the wall. "The good news is you won't need surgery. The bad news is you're looking at months of recovery time. No heavy lifting, no bending, no strenuous activity of any kind." The words hit Ben like a physical blow. Months? His garage couldn't survive that long without him. "Doc, I'm a mechanic. I can't just—" "Dad, please," Grace interrupted, squeezing his hand. "You have to take care of yourself." Dr. Matthews' expression softened. "Your daughter's right. Push too hard too soon, and you could end up with permanent damage. We're talking about a minimum of 3 months before you can even think about returning to light duty." Ben closed his eyes, trying to keep his breathing steady. The mortgage payment was due next week. Grace's college application fees were coming up. The garage's overhead costs wouldn't stop just because he was laid up. "The Lord provides, Ben," Pastor Will said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "You've helped so many others over the years. Let us help you now." Before Ben could respond, Nancy returned with pain medication. As she adjusted his IV, she mentioned casually, "By the way, the woman you saved is doing well. She's got a mild concussion and some bruising, but she'll make a full recovery." She paused, glancing at the door. "Those security's been pretty tight around her room. Some kind of VIP, I guess." "Security?" Ben frowned. He remembered the woman's words before he passed out. "Don't tell anyone who I am." "They've got 2 guards posted outside her door," Nancy confirmed. "Nobody's allowed in except authorized medical personnel." Pastor Will leaned forward in his chair. "Ben, there's something you should know. The story's already hitting the news. They're calling you a hero." "I'm no hero," Ben protested. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "But they didn't," Grace said firmly. "You did." The conversation was interrupted by raised voices in the hallway. Through the partially open door, Ben could hear someone saying, "The hero mechanic's in this room. The one who pulled her from the wreck." "Sir, you can't go in there," another voice insisted. "Hospital policy. We're with Channel 5 News. The public has a right to know about the mysterious woman he saved." Ben's heart rate monitor picked up speed. Grace stood up protectively between the door and her father's bed, while Pastor Will moved to close the door. "Sounds like you've got journalists sniffing around," Nancy said, shaking her head. "Want me to call security?" Ben nodded, sinking back against his pillows. The pain medication was starting to take effect, making the room feel slightly fuzzy around the edges. But it couldn't dull his worry about the mounting bills, the garage, or how he was going to provide for Grace. Through the door, he could still hear the reporters asking questions. Is it true the woman he rescued was traveling under an assumed name? Does he know her real identity? Pastor Will pulled the door firmly shut, muffling their voices. Don't you worry about any of that right now, Ben. Focus on healing. God didn't bring you this far to leave you stranded. Ben wanted to believe that. But as the pain medication drew him back toward sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that his act of compassion had set something bigger in motion, something that might change all their lives forever. Grace's hand remained steady in his, an anchor in the storm of uncertainty. Rest, Dad, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. The last thing Ben heard before drifting off was Nancy speaking firmly to the reporters in the hallway, telling them they needed to leave immediately. Then the medication pulled him under, into a dreamless sleep where bills and back braces and mysterious women couldn't follow. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across the pale green linoleum floor. Ben gripped the cold metal walker, his knuckles white with effort. Each step sent jolts of pain through his lower back, despite the heavy dose of painkillers flowing through his system. Take it slow, Mr. Carter, the nurse encouraged, walking beside him. Her rubber-soled shoes squeaked against the floor. There's no rush. But Ben needed to move, needed to check on the woman he'd pulled from the wreckage. Her whispered words still echoed in his mind. Don't tell anyone who I am. He shuffled forward, the walker clicking with each careful step. The back brace felt like a steel cage around his torso, restricting his breathing. Sweat beaded on his forehead from the simple effort of walking. As they rounded the corner toward the ICU, a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit stood outside one of the rooms. The guard's stern expression and earpiece marked him as more than hospital security. Sir, this area is restricted, the guard said, stepping forward with his hand raised. Ben stopped, steadying himself on the walker. Through the glass panel in the door, he caught a glimpse of the woman he'd saved. She sat propped up in bed, her dark hair falling in waves around her shoulders. Despite some cuts and bruises, there was an unmistakable elegance about her high cheekbones, refined features. But her eyes held fear, darting frequently toward the door like a trapped animal. I just wanted to see if she's okay, Ben explained, his voice rough from fatigue. I'm the one who... We know who you are, Mr. Carter, the guard cut in. But this area is off limits. Please, return to your room. The nurse touched Ben's arm gently. Come on, let's get you back. You've pushed yourself enough for one morning. The return journey felt twice as long. By the time Ben eased back into his hospital bed, his back muscles were screaming. Grace had gone to school, but Pastor Will sat in the visitor's chair, reading his worn Bible. Tried to visit her, didn't you? Will asked, looking up with knowing eyes. Ben nodded, wincing as he adjusted his position. There's a guard. Like something out of a movie. Will set his Bible aside and leaned forward. Been watching the news? He reached for the remote and turned on the small TV mounted on the wall. A local reporter stood outside the hospital, microphone in hand. Still no comment from Governor Dawson's office regarding the mysterious woman rescued last night by local mechanic Benjamin Carter. Sources say the accident victim remains under heavy security, leading to speculation about her identity. The governor? Ben frowned. What's he got to do with this? Will stroked his gray-streaked beard thoughtfully. Small towns have big ears, Ben. Word is, there's more to this story than a simple car crash. She begged me not to tell anyone who she is, Ben said quietly. But I never even got her name. Maybe that's for the best. Will's eyes held a hint of concern. Sometimes God puts us in the right place at the right time, but we don't always need to know why. The afternoon crawled by. Doctors came and went, discussing recovery times and physical therapy. Ben half listened, his mind still on the frightened woman behind the guarded door. As evening settled in, Grace returned with a bag of fresh clothes and dinner from home. She sat cross-legged on the foot of his bed, telling him about her day, when his phone buzzed on the side table. Unknown number, Ben muttered, reaching for it. Hello? A deep voice responded, cultured and authoritative. Mr. Carter? This is Michael Dawson, governor of Tennessee. Ben's hand tightened on the phone. Grace's eyes widened as she watched her father's expression change. Yes, sir? Ben managed to reply, his throat suddenly dry. I wanted to personally thank you for your heroic actions last night, the governor said. His tone was perfectly measured, like a practiced speech. "And to discuss the situation regarding the woman you rescued." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ben's hospital room as his phone buzzed on the bedside table. Grace picked it up, her eyes widening. "Dad, it's from the governor's office." Ben shifted uncomfortably in his bed, wincing at the movement. "Put it on speaker, honey." A crisp, professional voice filled the room. "Mr. Carter? This is Sarah Matthews, Executive Assistant to Governor Dawson. The governor would like to speak with you briefly." Grace squeezed her father's hand as a deeper, authoritative voice came through. "Mr. Carter? Michael Dawson here. I wanted to personally thank you for your heroic actions last night." "Just did what anyone would do, sir," Ben replied, his voice rough from fatigue. "No, Mr. Carter. What you did was extraordinary." The governor's tone was warm but measured. "I've arranged for my office to cover all your medical expenses. My staff will be visiting you shortly to handle the paperwork." Ben's throat tightened. That's very generous, sir. But please, I insist. It's the least we can do." There was a pause. "You're a father, I understand?" "Yes, sir. My daughter Grace is here with me." "Hello, Grace." The governor said, "Your father is a true hero. You must be very proud." Grace beamed. "I am, sir. He's the best dad ever." After the call ended, word spread quickly through the small town. By evening, Ben's room was filled with flowers, cards, and visitors. Pastor Will brought a casserole from the church ladies. The local news station sent a reporter, even Mr. Johnson, Ben's crankiest customer, stopped by with his wife and a box of homemade cookies. "You're famous, Dad," Grace exclaimed, scrolling through her phone. "Look at all these posts. How about you?" Ben shifted uncomfortably, not from pain this time, but from the attention. The local newspaper's website showed his photo alongside a blurry shot from the accident scene. Below it, a donation link had already raised thousands for his recovery. "People are so kind," he murmured, "but it feels like too much." Pastor Will patted his shoulder. "Accept it as a blessing, Ben. You've helped so many people over the years. Now it's their turn to help you." Throughout the day, men in dark suits came and went, carrying clipboards and speaking in hushed tones. They handled insurance forms and medical authorizations with quiet efficiency. One of them, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, pulled Ben aside. "The governor appreciates your discretion in this matter," she said softly. "We trust you understand the sensitive nature of the situation." Ben nodded, though he didn't understand at all. He kept thinking about the woman he'd pulled from the wreck. The morning news had shown only one grainy photo, her face turned away, dark hair falling forward. But he remembered her eyes in that moment before unconsciousness took her, deep brown, filled with both fear and relief. That evening, after Grace left for home with their elderly neighbor Mrs. Peterson, Ben dozed fitfully. The pain medication made his thoughts fuzzy, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger than him was unfolding. A soft scratching sound woke him. The night nurse had dimmed the lights, leaving only the gentle glow of monitoring equipment. On the floor near the door, a white envelope caught his eye. Ben reached for his walker, grimacing as he made his way across the room. Bending was impossible, so he used the walker's grip to carefully slide the envelope closer until he could pick it up. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper. The handwriting was elegant, but slightly shaky. "You saved my life. I owe you more than you know." Emily Ben stared at the signature for a long moment. Emily. The mysterious woman had a name now. He turned the paper over, but there was nothing more. Just those two simple sentences that somehow carried the weight of secrets he couldn't begin to understand. The night nurse found him still holding the note when she came to check his vitals. "You should be resting, Mr. Carter." She scolded gently. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, carefully tucking the note into his bedside drawer. But rest didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emily's face in the wreckage, heard her whispered plea, "Don't tell anyone who I am." Now everyone wanted to tell him who he was, a hero, a good Samaritan, a man blessed by fate. But Ben Carter didn't feel like any of those things. He was just a mechanic who couldn't bear to see someone trapped and hurting, a father who'd already lost too much to stand by while someone else suffered. The monitor beeped softly in the darkness. Outside his door, nurses chatted quietly as they made their rounds. Ben fingered the edge of the drawer where Emily's note lay hidden, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Ben Carter stared at the familiar walls of his home, letting out a long breath as Grace helped him through the front door. After a week in the sterile hospital environment, even the worn carpet and faded family photos felt like luxury. The house smelled of fresh-baked casseroles, evidence of their small town's kindness during crisis. "Look, Dad." Grace pointed to their kitchen counter, which was barely visible beneath foil-covered dishes and get-well cards. "Mrs. Peterson brought her famous tuna casserole, and the Hendersons left chicken pot pie." "Seems like half the town's been cooking," Ben said, touched by the generosity but uncomfortable with being the recipient of charity. He'd always been the one helping others, not the other way around. The back brace made every movement stiff and awkward as he lowered himself onto their weathered couch. The doctor's words echoed in his mind. No work for at least 6 weeks. 6 weeks without income. The thought made his stomach churn. Grace hovered nearby, watching him with worried eyes that reminded him so much of her mother. "Can I get you anything, Dad?" "I'm fine, sweetie. Why don't you go do your homework?" "I'll start on dinner soon." "Are you sure? Maybe I should." "Grace." He softened his tone. "I've got this. Your job is school, remember?" She hesitated but finally nodded, disappearing down the hallway to her room. Ben waited until he heard her door close before letting out a pained groan. Every breath sent daggers through his lower back. The next morning, Ben woke early out of habit. Years of opening the garage by 7 had programmed his internal clock. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen blinds as he carefully pushed himself up from bed, determined to maintain some normalcy. "Just eggs and toast," he muttered to himself. "Simple enough." The kitchen seemed bigger somehow, the distance to the refrigerator longer. He grabbed the egg carton, fighting to keep his movements smooth despite the restrictive brace. The familiar routine felt foreign now. Reaching for a pan sent shockwaves through his spine. Ben cracked the first egg, then reached for another. The simple twist required made him gasp. The egg slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. Yellow yolk spread across the linoleum as pain shot through his back like electricity. His knees buckled. The floor rushed up to meet him. "Dad!" Grace's frightened voice came from somewhere above. She must have heard him fall. "I'm okay," he managed, but his voice betrayed him. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he tried to push himself up. His arms shook with the effort. "Stop, please stop," Grace begged. She knelt beside him, her small hands gentle on his shoulders. "Let me help you." Pride warred with necessity as his 16-year-old daughter helped him to his feet. The short walk to the couch felt like miles. By the time he sank into the cushions, his shirt was soaked with sweat. Grace cleaned up the broken egg without a word, then brought him water and his pain medication. The role reversal aided his soul. He was supposed to be taking care of her, not the other way around. "I can stay home from school today," she offered. "Absolutely not." Ben tried to make his voice firm despite the tremor of pain. "I'll be fine, just need to rest a bit." After she left for school, the house felt emptier than ever. Ben closed his eyes, fighting the wave of helplessness threatening to drown him. "Lord," he whispered, "I don't understand your plan here, but I need your strength. Not for me, for Grace. She needs her father to be strong." The morning crept by. Ben dozed fitfully, television providing background noise to his worried thoughts. How long until the medical bills arrived? How many customers would the garage lose while he was laid up? The questions circled like vultures. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. Probably another neighbor with a casserole, he thought. But moving to answer it seemed impossible from his position on the couch. "Just a minute," he called out, gritting his teeth as he began the slow process of standing. The knock came again, softer this time. "Coming," he managed, using the furniture for support as he made his way to the door. The pain medication had worn off hours ago, making each step an exercise in endurance. Finally reaching the door, Ben pulled it open, expecting to see one of the church ladies with another dish. Instead, a woman in a dark hoodie and oversized sunglasses stood on his porch, her hands clasped tightly together. She was trembling slightly, despite the warm spring air. Even with most of her face hidden, Ben recognized her immediately, the woman from the crash, Emily. She looked different from the unconscious figure he'd pulled from the wreckage, but something in her posture, the way she held herself, triggered his memory. She stood frozen on his doorstep, as if unsure whether to flee or stay. The expensive fabric of her clothes contrasted sharply with her attempt at anonymity. Her fingers twisted nervously around each other as she faced him. "Emily?" Ben said softly, not wanting to startle her. She glanced quickly over her shoulder at the empty street before turning back to him. Her hand shook as she slowly removed her sunglasses, revealing the same frightened eyes he remembered from the hospital. They stared at each other in silence, the weight of their shared experience hanging between them. The mysterious woman he'd saved and the hero mechanic, both trapped now in circumstances beyond their control. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She trembled harder, looking lost and vulnerable on his humble front porch. A gentle knock echoed through the quiet house. Ben shifted on the couch, wincing at the movement. Through the window's sheer curtains, he could make out a figure on his porch. Slim, feminine, wearing an oversized hoodie and dark sunglasses despite the fading daylight. His heart quickened. The mysterious woman from the crash. "Grace?" he called out softly, but his daughter was still at school. Taking a deep breath, he gripped his walker and made his way to the door, each step careful and measured. When he opened it, Emily stood there trembling, her hands buried deep in her pockets. Up close, she looked both elegant and haunted, like a painting someone had tried to erase. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Ben studied her for a moment, his instincts as both a father and a Christian warring with caution. "Maybe not," he said gently, "but you are. Would you like to come in?" She hesitated, then nodded, slipping past him into the modest living room. Ben closed the door slowly, his back protesting the movement. "Please, sit," he offered, gesturing to the armchair while he lowered himself onto the couch. The pain medication made his movement sluggish, but his mind stayed sharp. Emily perched on the edge of the chair, removing her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. "I'm Emily," she said softly. "Emily Dawson, and I owe you my life." The surname clicked into place. "Dawson," Ben repeated. "Like the governor?" She nodded, twisting her hands in her lap. "Michael is my brother, though he'd probably prefer if people didn't know that." Bitterness crept into her voice. The black sheep sister, hidden away for 20 years. Bad for his image, you see. Ben remained quiet, letting her speak. Sometimes silence was the best medicine for a troubled soul. He'd learned that in the years after losing his wife. "I was 17 when the addiction started." Emily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Pills at first, then worse things. Michael was already climbing the political ladder. She swallowed hard. He gave me a choice, get clean in a private facility or be cut off completely. I chose the facility." "That must have been difficult," Ben said softly, noting how she flinched at the memory. "The recovery was actually the easy part. It was coming back that broke me." Michael had already crafted his perfect public image, the self-made man from humble beginnings, destined for greatness. A drug-addicted sister didn't fit the narrative. Tears spilled down her cheeks. So I disappeared, changed my name, moved to a small town, started teaching art therapy to other recovering addicts. I've been clean for 15 years, but it's never enough for him. Every time I try to reconnect, to be part of his life openly, she shook her head. "That's what happened the night of the crash?" Ben asked quietly. Emily nodded, wiping her eyes. "I went to his office in Nashville, begged him to acknowledge me, to let me be his sister again. He was planning his re-election campaign, and her voice cracked. "I just wanted my brother back, but he called security, said I was disturbing the peace." Ben's heart ached for her. He thought of Grace, how nothing in this world could make him deny her. "I drove away so angry, so hurt." Emily's hands trembled. "The rain was heavy, and I was crying. I barely saw the curve coming. Then you." She looked at him with raw gratitude. "You appeared like an angel in the storm. You saved me when my own blood wouldn't even claim me." "The Lord puts us where we need to be," Ben said simply, "even when we don't understand why." Emily's eyes filled with fresh tears. "But now I've put you in danger too. Michael's people are looking for me. If they find out I came here." She glanced toward the window. "The story's already too public. A mechanic hero, a mysterious woman. People are asking questions. Michael can't risk the truth coming out, not with elections coming up." Ben shifted, ignoring the twinge in his back. "Sometimes the truth needs to come out, Emily. Secrets have a way of poisoning the soul." "You don't understand," she said urgently. "Michael's powerful. He has connections. The medical bills he promised to pay, the help for your garage, it could all disappear. Your daughter's future." Before Ben could respond, bright headlights swept across the front windows. Two black SUVs crawled past the house, their government plates clearly visible in the gathering dusk. Emily jumped to her feet, panic clear on her face. They're looking for me. I have to go. I'm so sorry. I never meant to drag you into this. She grabbed her sunglasses, pulling the hood low over her face. Please, she begged, don't tell anyone I was here. For your own safety. Ben struggled to stand, but she was already moving toward the back door. Emily, wait. But she was gone, slipping into the shadows of his backyard just as the SUVs made another pass down the street. Ben watched through the window as they moved slowly by, their tinted windows hiding whoever searched within. He sank back onto the couch, his mind heavy, with the weight of Emily's story and the danger it represented. The woman he'd pulled from the wreck wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was a soul in need of healing, running from powers far greater than herself. The SUVs disappeared around the corner, but their presence left a chill in the air. Ben realized that his act of compassion that rainy night had pulled him into something much bigger than a simple rescue, something that could either destroy two families or heal them both. Ben sat at his kitchen table, staring at the stack of unopened bills. His back throbbed despite the medication, a constant reminder of that rainy night. The morning sunlight streaming through the window did nothing to brighten his mood as he reached for another envelope with shaking hands. "Dad, let me help with those," Grace said, reaching for the pile. She had that same worried look her mother used to get, far too grown up for her 16 years. "It's not your job to worry about this, sweetheart." Ben tried to smile, but the movement in his shoulders sent another spike of pain down his spine. He couldn't hide his grimace. "You're hurting again," Grace observed quietly. "Maybe we should call Dr. Matthews." As if on cue, his phone buzzed, the doctor's office. Ben answered, his throat tight as he listened to the nurse's message. When he hung up, Grace was watching him intently. "The x-rays came back," he said, his voice rough. "Doc wants to see me right away." An hour later, Ben sat in Dr. Matthews' office, the MRI images glowing on the screen behind the doctor's desk. The medical terms washed over him: herniated disc, nerve compression, spinal stenosis. "Bottom line, Ben," Dr. Matthews said, leaning forward, "without surgery, this isn't going to get better. And even with surgery, recovery will take months." Ben's stomach clenched. Months? At minimum, no heavy lifting, no bending, no auto work. The doctor's expression softened. "I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." Back home, Ben found Grace in the garage, organizing tools they couldn't use. She'd labeled everything, just like her mother would have done. The sight made his chest ache. "The bank called while you were gone," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "They left a message." Ben's shoulders slumped. He'd been avoiding their calls, knowing what was coming. With no income and mounting medical bills, they were falling behind on the mortgage. That evening, after Grace went to bed, Ben sat in his recliner, the bank notice in his trembling hands. The words blurred before his eyes. "Final warning. Foreclosure proceedings. 30 days notice." His phone lit up with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, expecting another collector, but something made him pick up. "Ben?" Emily's voice was soft, concerned. "I heard about the doctor's appointment." He sat up straighter, wincing. "How did you, small town?" she said. "Listen, I want to help. I have money set aside." "No," Ben cut her off firmly. "I appreciate it, but I can't take your money. This isn't charity," Emily insisted. "You saved my life. Let me, please." Ben's voice cracked. I can't." There was a long pause. "Then let me find another way," she said finally. "Trust me, okay?" After they hung up, Ben bowed his head, pride warring with desperation. The thought of losing his home, of failing Grace, it was almost more than he could bear. Miles away in Nashville, Emily paced the governor's mansion library, her brother Michael watching her with cool detachment. The room's grandeur, with its leather-bound books and oil paintings, felt suffocating. "You have to help him," she pleaded. "He saved my life, Michael. He hurt himself saving me, and now he's about to lose everything." The governor adjusted his tie, his expression unchanged. "The medical bills are being handled quietly, as promised. Anything more draws attention we can't afford. He needs surgery. His daughter is not our concern." Michael's voice turned sharp. "You're already taking too many risks, Emily. Those secret visits to their house, the phone calls, it has to stop." Emily stepped closer, her hands clenched. "I won't let them suffer because of me, because of your precious image." "Listen carefully," Michael said, rising from his chair. His tone was glacial. If you step into the light, you'll ruin us both. 20 years I've kept your secrets, protected you from scandal. One wrong move now destroys everything." Emily stood frozen, tears threatening to fall. In her brother's cold eyes, she saw no trace of the boy who had once promised to always protect her. Power had changed him, or maybe just revealed who he truly was. Emily's old station wagon pulled up to Ben's modest house early that morning, when the Tennessee sun was just starting to warm the dewy grass that stretched across his small front yard. The engine ticked as it cooled, and through the windshield, she could see the peeling paint on the porch railings and the stack of unopened mail visible through the screen door. She hesitated for a long moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel as her brother's cold warning echoed in her mind like a threat. But then she looked at the container of homemade chicken soup sitting on the passenger seat, steam still rising from beneath the lid, and gathered her courage along with the warm offering. Her soft knock echoed through the quiet morning air, mixing with the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking and the gentle rustle of leaves in the old oak tree that shaded half the front yard. Grace opened the door, her face lighting up instantly like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "Miss Emily, you came back!" The teenager's enthusiasm made Emily's heart swell with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. The kind of pure joy that reminded her why she'd fought so hard to get clean. "I brought soup," Emily said, holding up the container with hands that trembled slightly from nerves. "My grandmother's recipe. She used to make it for me when I was your age, and the world felt too heavy to carry." "Dad's in the living room," Grace said, ushering her inside through the small entryway cluttered with work boots and Grace's school backpack. "He's having one of his rough mornings. The pain keeps him up most nights now." They found Ben attempting to stand from his worn leather recliner, his calloused hands gripping the armrests as his face tightened with the kind of pain that went bone deep. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the gray that had crept into his dark hair over the past few weeks. "Emily?" he said, surprise, and something else, maybe concern, maybe fear crossing his weathered features. "You shouldn't be here. Your brother made it pretty clear. My brother doesn't get to decide where I go anymore," Emily said firmly, setting the soup down on the coffee table next to a stack of medical bills and prescription bottles. "I've spent too many years letting others control my life, make my choices for me. Those days are over." Ben settled back in his chair with a heavy sigh, knowing better than to argue with the quiet determination in her voice. Grace bustled into the kitchen for bowls and spoons, her footsteps light on the worn linoleum, leaving them alone for a moment that stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. "The house needs some tidying," Emily observed gently, glancing around at the pile of unfolded laundry spilling from a basket. The dusty surfaces that spoke of days when simply moving was an act of will, and the general disarray that comes when pain makes even simple tasks feel like mountains. "Grace has school, and you can't move much." "Let me help." "I can't ask you to," Ben started, his pride warring with the exhaustion that had settled into his bones. "You're not asking. I'm offering." Emily's voice was gentle but carried the strength of someone who had learned the difference between giving up and letting go. Sometimes accepting help is an act of grace itself. I learned that in recovery that letting people care for you isn't weakness, it's courage. Throughout the morning, Emily moved through the house like a quiet breeze, bringing order to chaos without making Ben feel diminished in his own home. She folded laundry while telling him about her early days in recovery, how a kind nurse named Maria had shown her that everyone deserves a second chance, that rock bottom could be a foundation instead of a grave. She dusted shelves with careful hands and shared stories of the art therapy classes she now taught at the rehabilitation center downtown, how she'd watched broken souls find their way back to wholeness, one brushstroke at a time. "Art saved me," she explained, carefully straightening a photo of Grace and Ben at a fishing dock, both of them squinting into the sun with matching grins. "When words failed me, when the shame was so thick I couldn't speak, color spoke for me. When guilt silenced my voice, the canvas listened without judgment." Ben watched her from his chair, his usual defenses slowly lowering, like walls worn down by persistent, gentle rain. There was something deeply authentic about her presence, something that reminded him of his late wife's nurturing spirit, the way Sarah used to hum while she cleaned, making even the most mundane tasks feel like acts of love. Around noon, Grace joined them for soup in the living room. The three of them gathered around the coffee table like a family that had always been. The warm broth filled the house with the scent of comfort and care, of herbs and slow-simmered love. "This is amazing," Grace said between spoonfuls, her eyes closing briefly in appreciation. Mom used to make soup like this when we were sick. She said it could cure anything if you put enough love in the pot. Ben's expression softened at the memory, the sharp edges of grief smoothing into something more bearable. Sarah always knew how to make things better. She had this way of finding hope in the hardest times, of making our little house feel like the whole world. Tell me about her, Emily said softly, settling onto the couch with her own bowl, her dark eyes reflecting genuine interest and compassion. And so Ben did, sharing stories he hadn't spoken aloud in months. He told her about Sarah's infectious laugh that could fill a room, about her small garden behind the house where she grew tomatoes and sunflowers, about her way of finding silver linings in storm clouds. Emily listened with the kind of attention that felt like a gift, asking questions that showed she truly cared about understanding their loss, about honoring the woman who had shaped this little family. As afternoon stretched on, the light in the room growing golden and warm, Emily taught Grace some simple sketching techniques while Ben rested in his chair. Their quiet conversation and occasional laughter drifted through the house like music that had been missing for far too long, filling spaces that grief had hollowed out. "You have real talent," Emily told Grace, admiring her sketch of their backyard oak tree. The way the teenager had captured not just its shape, but somehow its essence, strong roots, reaching branches, endurance through seasons. Art isn't just about making pretty pictures, it's about seeing the world differently, finding beauty in broken things, learning that scars can be their own kind of art. Ben watched them from his chair, something warm and unfamiliar stirring in his chest like a seed that had been dormant through winter. It had been so long since the house felt this whole. Since Grace's laughter came so easily, since he'd felt like more than just a man trying to survive one day at a time. When evening approached, painting the sky in soft pastels outside the windows, Emily helped Grace prepare a simple dinner of sandwiches and fresh fruit. They ate together at the small kitchen table, sharing stories and small jokes, the weight of Ben's injury and Emily's complicated past feeling lighter in the golden glow of connection. Grace told them about her art teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, who had entered one of her paintings in a regional contest. Emily shared memories of her grandmother's tiny apartment in Memphis, where she'd first learned to see beauty in simple things. As twilight painted the sky in deep purple and gold, Emily and Ben sat on the front porch while Grace finished her homework inside, the yellow light from her bedroom window spilling onto the yard. The old porch swing creaked gently as they rocked back and forth, watching as the first stars began to appear like pinpricks of hope in the vast Tennessee sky. "Thank you," Ben said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the evening sounds of crickets and distant traffic. Not just for today, but for showing Grace that broken things can be beautiful again, that maybe we're not as fragile as we thought. Emily's eyes reflected the emerging starlight as she gazed upward, her face peaceful in a way that suggested she was finally learning to forgive herself. "You know, I've been thinking about that night, the crash, about the rain and the metal and the fear." She paused, gathering her thoughts like flowers from a garden. Maybe God didn't save me that night just for me. Maybe he had bigger plans than I could see. The words hung in the evening air, full of possibility and something neither of them was ready to name. But both could feel a connection that ran deeper than gratitude, stronger than circumstance. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as more stars emerged to light the Tennessee night, each one a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always light waiting to be found. Emily's blue sedan pulled into Ben's driveway right on schedule. She'd been driving him to physical therapy 3 times a week, despite her brother's warnings to stay away. The morning air was crisp, and Ben was already waiting on the porch, leaning on his cane. "Morning," he called out, his voice warm despite the obvious discomfort on his face. Emily hurried to help him, but he raised his hand. "I got it. Doc says I need to practice." Slowly, carefully, Ben made his way down the steps. Each movement was measured, deliberate. Emily stayed close, ready to help if needed, but respecting his independence. When he finally settled into the passenger seat, he let out a long breath. "Grace packed you both lunch?" he said, holding up a brown paper bag. "That girl's determined to take care of everyone." The drive to therapy was peaceful, filled with easy conversation about small-town life. Emily had grown to love these morning drives, so different from her old life of isolation and shame. Here, with Ben, she felt normal. At the clinic, Ben worked with determination. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he performed the exercises, but he never complained. Emily watched from the waiting area, pretending to read a magazine while secretly admiring his resilience. When they returned home, Grace was in the living room, surrounded by art supplies Emily had brought over last week. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her face intense with concentration as she worked on a canvas. "What have you got there, sweetheart?" Ben asked, easing himself onto the couch. Grace bit her lip, hesitating. It's Mom's garden." She turned the canvas around. The paintings showed their backyard, full of bright flowers and morning light. It wasn't perfect. The proportions were a bit off, the colors perhaps too bold, but it captured something essential: hope. Emily's breath caught. She knew Grace hadn't painted since her mother passed away 5 years ago. "It's beautiful, Grace, the way you captured the light." "Really?" Grace's eyes sparkled. "You're not just saying that?" "The sunflowers," Ben said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "They're exactly like the ones your mom planted." Emily moved to sit beside Grace on the floor. "You have a natural eye for composition. Would you like to learn more techniques? I could show you some basics." Grace nodded eagerly, and for the next hour, Emily demonstrated different brushstrokes and color mixing. Ben watched them from the couch, a gentle smile on his face. Later that afternoon, Emily headed to Carter's Auto and Repair. Though Ben couldn't work, she'd been helping keep the office running. The regular customers had been wary at first, a stranger in Ben's office and a woman with a past, no less. But day by day, her genuine care for the business and her quick learning had won them over. "Mrs. Henderson's invoice is ready," Emily called out to Mike, Ben's lead mechanic. "And I organized the parts inventory like you asked." "Thanks, Emily," Mike replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "Place runs smoother with you here, I'll give you that." By evening, Emily had finished the day's paperwork and headed back to Ben's house. The smell of pasta sauce greeted her as she walked in. Grace was setting the table while Ben stirred a pot on the stove, moving carefully but insisting on cooking. "Family recipe?" he explained when Emily raised an eyebrow. "Some things are worth a little extra effort." They gathered around the small kitchen table, the setting sun casting warm light through the windows. Grace served the spaghetti, proudly explaining how she'd help with the sauce. The conversation flowed easily, touching on Grace's painting, the garage, and small-town gossip. Then Grace started telling a story about her dad's attempt to fix their ancient washing machine, complete with dramatic gestures and sound effects. Ben played along, defending his mechanical honor, and suddenly Grace burst into laughter. Real, unrestrained laughter that filled the kitchen with joy. Emily watched as Ben's eyes misted over. She knew what he was thinking. It had been years since they'd heard that sound. Grace's laughter was like music, like healing, like proof that broken things could be made whole again. The three of them sat there in the warm kitchen light, sharing bread and stories and laughter, creating something that felt remarkably like family. Emily caught Ben's eye across the table, and in that moment, despite all the complications and dangers, she knew she was exactly where she needed to be. The bell above the garage's office door chimed, drawing Ben's attention from the stack of invoices Emily had organized the day before. A man in pressed khakis and a blue button-down shirt stepped inside, notebook in hand. Something about his eager expression made Ben's stomach tighten. "Mr. Carter? I'm Dave Mitchell from the Herald." The reporter held out his hand. "Got a minute?" Ben shifted in his chair, grateful for the desk that hid his back brace. "Just doing paperwork today. Shop's closed for repairs." "Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss." Dave pulled out a chair without waiting for an invitation. "Word is you've had some help keeping the business running while you recover. A mysterious woman who shows up most afternoons?" Ben's fingers tensed around his pen. "Just a friend lending a hand." "Funny thing about friends," Dave said, flipping open his notebook. "Most don't need to wear disguises. Sunglasses, hoodies in summer heat, makes folks wonder." "Not much to wonder about," Ben replied, his voice level despite his racing heart. "People here help each other. That's all." Sure. Dave nodded, but his eyes were sharp. "But when that helper bears a striking resemblance to Emily Dawson, never heard of her." The lie tasted bitter on Ben's tongue. "No? Governor's sister? Been out of the public eye for what, 20 years now?" Dave leaned forward. "Interesting coincidence that she vanished right after you saved that woman from the crash." The crash victim nobody's allowed to talk about. Ben stood carefully, using the desk for support. "If you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Just one more thing." Dave pulled out his phone, swiped the screen a few times. This was posted on social media an hour ago. Ben's heart sank as he looked at the photo. It showed him and Emily at Wilson's Market 2 days ago. Her sunglasses slipped down just enough to make her features clear. She was smiling, helping him carry a grocery bag to her car. "I respect what you did that night, Mr. Carter. Real hero stuff." Dave's voice softened. "But there's more to this story, isn't there? The public has a right to know why the governor's hiding his own sister. The public has a right to mind its own business." Ben's tone was steel. "And so do you." The reporter stood, tucking away his phone. "Stories like this don't stay buried, Mr. Carter, especially with an election year coming up. Better to control the narrative than let it control you." After Dave left, Ben sank back into his chair, pain shooting through his lower back. His hand shook as he dialed Emily's number. She answered on the first ring. "Ben, what's wrong?" "There's a photo," he said quietly. "You and me at Wilson's. It's online." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "How bad?" "Clear enough." Reporter just left the garage asking questions. Ben rubbed his temples. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful." "No, I should have." Her voice trembled. "I knew better than to go out in daylight. I got comfortable. Happy. Stupid of me." "You're not stupid for wanting a normal life." "Normal isn't an option for me, Ben. Never has been." She took a shaky breath. "I need to make some calls. Lay low for a while." "Emily, I'll text you later," she said quickly, and hung up. The afternoon crawled by. Ben tried to focus on paperwork, but his mind kept drifting to Emily. Grace called after school, worried because Emily hadn't shown up for their usual art lesson. Ben assured her everything was fine, another lie that burned his conscience. At 6, he locked up the garage and drove home slowly, his back aching from sitting too long. The house felt empty without Emily's evening visit. No soup simmering on the stove, no gentle laughter as she helped Grace with homework. His phone buzzed just after midnight. It was Emily, but instead of a message, she'd forwarded a text she'd received. "End this or we will. You know what's at stake. Don't make us clean up your mess again." Ben's fingers hovered over the keyboard, wanting to comfort her, to promise protection. But what could he really offer? He was just a broken mechanic with a mountain of bills and a bad back. She was caught in a web of politics and power he couldn't begin to untangle. His phone buzzed again. "Emily, I'm so sorry, Ben. I never meant to drag you into this." Before he could respond, 3 dots appeared as she typed another message. "They're outside my hotel. I have to go. Please keep Grace safe." Ben stared at the screen until it went dark, feeling as helpless as he had that rainy night by the crashed car. Only this time, he couldn't lift the weight, crushing the person he wanted to save. The evening shadows stretched long across Ben's living room as Emily paced, her usually composed features tight with worry. Her hands trembled as she held up her phone, showing Ben the threatening message. "They're watching me," she whispered. "My brother's people, they always find a way to control everything." Ben shifted on the couch, wincing slightly as he adjusted his position. The pain in his back was a constant reminder of that rainy night. But right now, his concern was focused entirely on Emily's distress. "What exactly did the message say?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. Emily sank into the armchair across from him. "In this or we will. Simple. Direct. That's how they operate." She ran her fingers through her hair, a gesture Ben had come to recognize as a sign of her anxiety. "I can't go back to my apartment. They'll be waiting." Grace appeared in the doorway, her young face etched with concern. She'd been hovering nearby, pretending to do homework, but clearly listening to every word. "Dad," she said, stepping into the room, "Emily can stay in our guest room, right?" Her eyes held that same determined look her mother used to have. "We can't let her go back there." Ben looked at his daughter, touched by her immediate desire to help. Then he turned to Emily, who was already shaking her head. "I couldn't impose," Emily protested. "You've both done so much already." "It's not an imposition," Ben said firmly. "Grace is right. You're not going back there tonight. Or any night until we figure this out." Emily's eyes welled with tears. "But what about your reputation? The whole town's already talking. If they find out, I'm staying here." "Let them talk," Grace declared, moving to sit on the arm of Emily's chair. "God wouldn't bring her here for nothing, Dad. Remember what Pastor Will always says about divine timing?" Ben smiled at his daughter's wisdom. "She's got a point there." He leaned forward, ignoring the twinge in his back. Emily, sometimes the Lord puts us exactly where we need to be, even if we don't understand why at first. Emily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I stopped believing in God's plan a long time ago, she admitted quietly. When everything fell apart, when my addiction took over, it felt like he'd abandoned me. He never did, Ben said softly. He was there in the recovery meetings, in the strength you found to get clean. And maybe, he paused, choosing his words carefully, maybe he was even there on that rainy night, making sure I drove by at exactly the right moment. Grace squeezed Emily's shoulder. Can we pray together? Mom always said prayer makes everything clearer. Emily hesitated, then nodded. Ben reached out his hands, and they formed a small circle. Grace's young hands, Emily's delicate ones, and Ben's work-roughened palms all linked together. Ben's voice was steady and sure as he prayed. Lord, we come to you tonight asking for protection and guidance. Watch over Emily. Keep her safe from those who wish to control her life. Give us all the wisdom to know your path and the courage to follow it. And thank you, Lord, for bringing us together in ways we never expected. Amen. Amen, Grace and Emily echoed. Just then, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Grace yelped in surprise. Storm must have hit the power lines, Ben said calmly. Grace, honey, you know where the emergency candles are? On it, Dad. Grace's footsteps padded away in the darkness, returning moments later with several candles and matches. Soon, the room was bathed in warm candlelight. Grace yawned dramatically. I should probably finish my homework before the battery dies on my laptop, she said, with a meaningful look between her father and Emily that made Ben shake his head fondly. Sometimes his daughter was far too perceptive for her 16 years. After Grace left, Emily and Ben sat in comfortable silence, watching the candlelight dance across the walls. The storm rattled the windows, but inside felt peaceful, protected. Thank you, Emily said finally, not just for tonight, but for everything. You've shown me more kindness in these past weeks than my own family has in years. Ben shifted in his seat. You don't have to thank me. We help each other. That's what people are supposed to do. Is that what you always taught Grace? Tried to. Her mother was better at explaining it, though. Sarah had a way of making everything sound simple and right. His voice grew soft with memory. Emily leaned forward, the candlelight catching the gold flecks in her eyes. Tell me about her? Sarah? Ben smiled. She was light. That's the best way I can describe her. Everything seemed brighter when she was around. Even at the end, when the cancer was winning, she'd find ways to make us laugh. Grace has that same light, Emily observed quietly. Yes, she does. Ben's heart swelled with pride. Sarah would have liked you, you know. She always believed in second chances. The candlelight flickered, casting warm shadows across Emily's face as she absorbed his words. Second chances? She repeated softly. Do you really think they're possible, even for someone with a past like mine? I know they are, Ben said with quiet conviction. Every sunrise is God's way of saying we get another chance to get it right. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled only with the sound of rain against the windows and distant thunder. In the gentle glow of the candles, Ben could see the tension slowly leaving Emily's shoulders, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. It's strange, she murmured. I've spent so long running from everything, my past, my family, myself. But sitting here in this old house with you and Grace, for the first time in years, I don't feel like running. Ben's heart quickened at her words, but before he could respond, the lights suddenly hummed back to life. The moment shifted, but didn't break. Instead, it settled into something warm and real, full of unspoken understanding. Emily smiled softly. I should probably get some rest. Thank you, Ben, for everything. Any time, he replied, meaning it more than he'd meant anything in a long time. The morning sun filtered through Ben's kitchen window as he sipped his coffee, trying to ignore the constant throbbing in his back. The phone's sharp ring cut through the peaceful quiet, making him jump slightly. Mr. Carter? A woman's professional voice crackled through the speaker. This is Sandra Martinez from National Weekly News. We'd love to feature your heroic rescue story in our Sunday edition. Ben's chest tightened. He glanced toward the guest room where Emily had been staying. I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but I'd rather not. Our readers would be inspired by your courage. Sandra pressed on. The small-town mechanic who risked everything to save a stranger? It's exactly the kind of uplifting story America needs right now. The sound of footsteps made Ben look up. Emily stood in the doorway, her face pale. She shook her head frantically, mouthing the word, "Please." "I'm sorry," Ben said firmly into the phone. "I'm not interested in any publicity. I just did what anyone would do." After hanging up, Emily's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "If they start digging." She didn't finish the thought. "Nobody's going to bother us," Ben assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at his gut. The next afternoon proved him wrong. Ben was helping Grace with her homework at the kitchen table when a car pulled into their driveway. Through the window, they watched a woman in a crisp blazer step out, camera in hand. "Dad," Grace said nervously, "isn't that the reporter who called?" Before Ben could respond, Sandra Martinez was already snapping photos through their front window. Emily, who'd been reading in the living room, quickly ducked behind a wall. "Stay inside," Ben told them, grimacing as he pushed himself up from his chair. His back protested, but he made his way to the front door. "Mr. Carter," Sandra called out, still taking pictures. "Just a few questions about your connection to Emily Dawson." Ben's blood ran cold. "Please leave my property," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. "Is it true she's been living here? Does the governor know his sister is—" "This is private property," Ben interrupted. "I'm asking you nicely to leave." The reporter's smile never wavered. "The public has a right to know about this story, Mr. Carter, especially given the governor's upcoming re-election campaign." Ben watched helplessly as she returned to her car, knowing the damage was already done. Within hours, his phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Grace showed him the headline that was spreading across social media: "Hero mechanic and governor's sister in secret relationship?" The article included the photo of Ben standing in his doorway and a grainy shot through the window that barely caught Emily's profile as she ducked away. The story spun wild theories about political scandals and hidden agendas. "I'm so sorry," Emily said, her voice breaking as she read the article. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. I should never have stayed here." "Don't talk like that," Ben replied. "We'll figure this out." But by sunset, 3 news vans had parked across the street. Reporters called out questions whenever anyone approached the window. Camera flashes lit up their yard like lightning. Grace sat huddled on the couch, pulling her knees to her chest. "Dad," she whispered, "there are people trying to look in through the back windows too." Ben drew all the curtains, his jaw clenched tight. The constant camera flashes still leaked through, casting strange shadows on their walls. The phone kept ringing, reporters, talk shows, even political commentators wanting statements. "I can't believe they're doing this to you," Emily said, pacing the living room. "Your privacy, your daughter's safety, they don't care about any of it." A loud knock at the door made Grace jump. "Please," called out another reporter's voice, "we just want your side of the story." "It's okay, sweetie," Ben said, seeing the fear in his daughter's eyes. But Grace was staring past him, at something through a gap in the curtains. "Dad," she whispered, "there are more cars coming." Ben peered out. At least a dozen vehicles were now lining their quiet street. Reporters huddled in groups, speaking into cameras or typing frantically on phones. The flashing lights and constant chatter created a circus-like atmosphere that felt completely alien to their peaceful neighborhood. "I should call the police?" Ben said, reaching for his phone. "They won't help," Emily replied, her voice hollow. "Not with this many media outlets involved. My brother's people probably tipped them off in the first place." Grace pressed herself against her father's side, trembling slightly as another loud knock rattled the door. "What are we going to do?" Ben wrapped an arm around his daughter, while his other hand instinctively reached for Emily's. The 3 of them stood in their darkened living room, surrounded by the chaos they never asked for, watching camera flashes paint their walls with unwanted attention. "Whatever we do," Ben said firmly, "we're going to face it together." The noise outside grew louder as more reporters arrived, their questions and camera clicks creating a storm of unwanted attention that showed no signs of calming. Grace buried her face in her father's shirt, and Emily's hand tightened around Ben's as the reality of their situation sank in. Their quiet life had been shattered in the space of a single day, and none of them knew how to make it right again. Ben stared at the morning newspaper on his kitchen table, his coffee growing cold beside it. The bold headline screamed, "Governor Dawson denounces hero mechanic story as complete fabrication." The official statement from the governor's office was printed below. Recent allegations involving a private citizen and a member of the governor's family are entirely false. The governor has no sister, and any claims to the contrary are politically motivated attempts to damage his reputation. Ben's hands trembled as he folded the paper. His phone buzzed continuously with text messages from customers. Need to cancel my appointment next week. Found another shop. Don't feel comfortable bringing my car there anymore. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Grace sat across from him, pushing her cereal around in the bowl, untouched. Dad? Her voice was small. Jenny's mom uninvited me from the sleepover this weekend. Said her husband doesn't want me there anymore. Ben's heart cracked. He reached across the table to squeeze her hand. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. It's not fair, Grace whispered. We didn't do anything wrong. Before Ben could respond, a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Through the window, he spotted two black SUVs parked in his driveway. Men in dark suits stood on his porch. Emily appeared from the hallway, her face ashen. They're here for me. You don't have to go, Ben said, standing up too quickly. Pain shot through his back, making him wince. If I stay, they'll destroy you completely. Emily's eyes filled with tears. My brother's people won't stop until there's nothing left. The knocking grew more insistent. One of the men called out, Miss Dawson, we're here to escort you to a secure location for your own safety. Grace ran to Emily, throwing her arms around her waist. Please don't go. Emily hugged her tight, then pulled away gently. I have to protect your dad and you. I'm so sorry. She turned to Ben, her voice breaking. I never meant for any of this to happen. Before Ben could stop her, she opened the door. The men in suits quickly surrounded her, leading her to one of the SUVs. She didn't look back as they drove away. The rest of the day passed in a blur of cancellations and whispers. Ben sat at his desk in the garage, watching his appointment book empty hour by hour. The phone rang again, another customer backing out. I understand, he said mechanically, crossing off another name. Thank you for letting me know. Around noon, Grace called from school, crying, Dad, can you pick me up? Someone wrote liar's daughter on my locker, and the principal won't do anything about it. By the time Ben arrived at the school, Grace's eyes were red and puffy. She slid into the truck without a word. On the drive home, she stared out the window, looking so much like her mother it hurt. We'll get through this, Ben said softly. God has a plan. Grace just nodded, but he could see she didn't believe him. Neither did he, if he was honest. Back at the garage, Ben stood in the empty service bay where 4 cars should have been waiting for repairs. The familiar smell of oil and metal surrounded him, but instead of comfort, it brought only emptiness. The tools he'd used for decades hung on their hooks, untouched. The hydraulic lift stood silent. His back spasmed, a sharp reminder of that rainy night when he'd chosen to help a stranger. He grabbed onto the workbench, breathing through the pain. The medical bills sat in a stack on his desk, next to the mortgage statement marked past due in red letters. The silence in the garage pressed in around him. No engines running, no radio playing country music, no friendly conversation with customers he'd known for years. Just silence. Pictures of Grace's artwork hung on the office wall. Bright, hopeful paintings she'd done while Emily taught her about colors and shapes. Now they seemed to mock him with their cheerfulness. Another spasm gripped his back. Ben lowered himself onto the old stool by his workbench, the same one he'd sat on thousands of times before. But today, it felt different. Today, it felt like everything he'd built was slipping through his fingers. The afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the empty floor. Ben remembered his father working in this same space, teaching him how to fix engines, how to treat people right, how to live with integrity. What would he say now? The local news van drove by slowly for the 3rd time that day, probably hoping to catch him doing something newsworthy. Ben watched it pass through the grimy window, wondering how something as simple as helping someone in need had turned his life upside down. His phone buzzed. Another text message. This time from Pastor Will, praying for you, brother. This too shall pass. But would it? The governor's statement had painted him as a liar, an opportunist trying to exploit his family. The truth didn't seem to matter anymore. Ben's gaze fell on the small cross hanging above his desk, the one his wife had given him when they first opened the shop. The pain in his back throbbed in time with his heartbeat as he stared at it. The empty garage echoed with memories. Teaching Grace to change oil when she was 12, Emily's laughter as she attempted to organize his filing system, countless hours of honest work and simple faith. Now it all felt hollow. Standing carefully, mindful of his injury, Ben shuffled to the center of the garage. The space that had always been his sanctuary now felt like a tomb. The tools that had always been an extension of his hands now seemed like strangers. His back seized again, harder this time. Ben grabbed onto a nearby tool cart, metal clanging in the silence. The pain brought tears to his eyes. Or maybe it wasn't just the pain. Looking up at the cross one more time, Ben whispered into the empty garage, his voice rough with emotion, "Lord, what now?" The words hung in the air, unanswered. Outside, another customer drove past without stopping, and the shadows grew longer on the floor of Carter's Auto and Repair. The morning sun filtered through Ben's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the empty chairs where Emily and Grace usually sat for breakfast. 2 days had crawled by since Emily's sudden disappearance. Ben's trembling fingers pressed the call button on his phone again, but the same automated message mocked him. "We're sorry, but the number you have dialed is no longer in service." He set the phone down with a heavy sigh, his back protesting as he shifted in his chair. The house felt hollow now, like someone had scooped out its heart. Grace had already left for school after much convincing that she needed to face her classmates, despite the cruel whispers and stares. The silence pressed in on him. Ben limped to the sink, his movements stiff and careful, and stared out at his garage. The empty parking lot told its own story. No cars waiting for repair. No customers calling. Just empty spaces where trust and reputation used to stand. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I don't understand. I just tried to help someone in need. Isn't that what you taught us?" The pain in his back flared as he tried to wash the dishes, forcing him to grip the counter, but it was nothing compared to the ache in his chest. Emily had become more than just the woman he'd pulled from that wreck. She'd brought light back into their home, given Grace someone to look up to, and shown him that his heart could still feel something other than loss. By midday, Ben sat in his recliner, medical bills spread across his lap. The numbers blurred before his eyes as doubt crept in like a shadow. Had he been foolish to believe in miracles? To think that saving one life could somehow save his own? The doorbell's chime startled him from his dark thoughts. Pastor Will Harper stood on the porch, his weathered face creased with concern. "Thought you might need some company," he said, holding up a paper bag. Sarah made her famous chicken pot pie. Ben managed a weak smile and let him in. "You didn't have to come, Pastor." "Oh, I think I did." Will settled into the armchair across from Ben, his eyes kind but searching. "The church is praying for you, son. All of us." "Prayers?" Ben's laugh held no humor. "Seems like prayers are what got me into this mess. I prayed for guidance that night on the road. I prayed while helping Emily. Fat lot of good it did any of us." Will leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "You know, Ben, I've noticed something about storms in my years of ministry. They tend to show up right when God's about to reveal something important. What could he possibly be revealing here?" Ben gestured at the bills, at the empty garage visible through the window. "My business is dying. Grace is suffering. Emily's gone, probably locked away somewhere for her own good. And my back." He trailed off, pressing his hand against the word. "Constant ache." "Remember Job?" Will asked quietly. "He lost everything, but in his darkness, he learned who God really was. Sometimes our biggest trials aren't about punishment, they're about purpose." Ben closed his eyes, feeling the weight of tears he refused to shed. I keep thinking about her face when they took her away. She looked so scared, Will. Like all the progress she'd made, all the healing it was being stripped away. And that bothers you because you care about her," Will observed gently. "Of course I care." The words burst out before Ben could stop them. "She became family, to me and Grace both. And now," his voice cracked. Will stood and placed a steady hand on Ben's shoulder. "Then hold on to that truth. Family doesn't end because politicians say it should." After Pastor Will left, Ben found himself drawn to Emily's room, the guest room that had become hers. Everything was just as she'd left it, except for the few clothes the governor's people had packed for her. Her scent still lingered, a mix of lavender and hope. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, wondering if he'd ever see her again. His eye caught something partially hidden under the bedside table, a leather-bound sketchbook he'd never seen before. With trembling hands, he picked it up. The first page took his breath away. It was a detailed drawing of Grace laughing, her head thrown back in pure joy, every line capturing his daughter's spirit perfectly. He turned the page and found himself looking at his own face, not the tired, worried expression he'd worn lately, but a gentle smile as he worked on a car engine. Emily had captured a light in his eyes he hadn't even known was there. Page after page revealed moments he hadn't realized she'd been documenting. Grace and him sharing breakfast, the three of them watching sunset on the porch, simple scenes of their daily life together. But it was how she'd drawn them with such care and detail, such obvious love that made his vision blur. The last sketch was unfinished, just rough outlines of the three of them together, as if she'd been interrupted while drawing it. A drop of moisture fell onto the page, and Ben realized he was crying. He hadn't cried since Sarah's funeral, but now the tears came freely, falling for everything lost. Emily's freedom, Grace's peace, his own chance at happiness. He clutched the sketchbook to his chest, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Each drawing was proof that what they'd shared had been real, not some political scandal or media fabrication. It was family. It was love. It was Grace. And somewhere out there, Emily was alone again, probably thinking no one cared enough to fight for her. Ben's tears slowed as he stared at the unfinished sketch, his heart breaking for the empty spaces that might never be filled in. Ben's back ached as he lay in his darkened bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The digital clock on his nightstand blinked 11:42 p.m. Sleep had become his enemy lately, his mind refusing to quiet down, filled with worries about the garage, Grace's future, and Emily's sudden disappearance. The house felt hollow without Emily's presence. Her gentle laughter no longer echoed through the halls. The guest room remained untouched, her half-empty coffee mug still sitting on the bedside table where she'd left it the morning they took her away. Suddenly, Grace's footsteps thundered down the hallway. The door flew open, flooding his room with light from the corridor. "Dad, Dad, wake up! You need to see this!" Grace's voice trembled with excitement. She clutched the TV remote in her hand, her eyes wide with urgency. Ben pushed himself up, grimacing. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "It's Emily. She's on TV every channel." The television flickered to life, and there she was. Emily Dawson's face filled the screen, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. She sat in what looked like a hotel room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The timestamp in the corner showed this was happening live. "My name is Emily Dawson," she began, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "And yes, I am Governor Michael Dawson's sister. For 20 years, I've been hidden away like a shameful secret, but tonight I'm choosing to tell the truth." Grace perched on the edge of Ben's bed, gripping his hand. Ben couldn't tear his eyes from the screen as Emily continued. "When I was 16, I started using drugs to cope with the pressure of being in a political family. My brother Michael, now your governor, was beginning his career in politics. Instead of helping me get treatment, he chose to hide me away. He said it would ruin his chances of success if people knew his sister was an addict." Emily's voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "For 2 decades, I've lived in shadows, moving from facility to facility, never allowed to have a real life or identity. Until the night of the crash, the night Ben Carter saved my life." Ben's chest tightened as Emily's eyes welled with tears. "Ben Carter isn't just the hero who pulled me from that wreck. He's the first person in 20 years who looked at me and saw a human being worthy of compassion. Not a liability, not a secret, just someone who needed help." The camera zoomed in closer on Emily's face. "My brother abandoned me to protect his image. But Ben Carter, a man who barely makes ends meet, who's still grieving his wife, who risks losing everything by helping me, he showed me what real integrity looks like. His faith in God, his kindness to strangers, his dedication to his daughter Grace. He reminded me that we're all worthy of second chances." Grace squeezed Ben's hand tighter. On screen, Emily wiped away a tear. "The governor's office will try to discredit this video. They'll say I'm unstable or seeking attention, but I'm not hiding anymore. I'm clean, I'm strong, and I'm telling the truth because Ben Carter and his daughter showed me that real family isn't about maintaining appearances, it's about standing by each other through the hardest times." Emily leaned closer to the camera. "To everyone who's criticized Ben, who's abandoned his garage, who's questioned his character, you're wrong. He's the best man I've ever known. And to my brother Michael, I forgive you, but it's time for both of us to step into the light." The video cut to a reporter in a newsroom, but Ben barely heard the commentary. His vision blurred with tears as Grace wrapped her arms around him. "She did it," Ben whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She really did it." Grace nodded against his shoulder. She was so brave, Dad, just like you. The phone started ringing, Pastor Will's name flashing on the screen. Then Ben's cell phone lit up with text messages. The local news station's number appeared. In the distance, they could hear cars pulling up outside their house. But Ben just sat there, holding his daughter, watching as Emily's face appeared again and again on the screen. She'd risked everything, her safety, her privacy, her relationship with her powerful brother, to tell the truth, to defend him. The reporter's voice cut through his thoughts. Governor Dawson's office has not yet responded to these allegations, but social media is exploding with support for Emily Dawson and Ben Carter. The hashtag number, Stand with Ben and Emily, is trending nationwide. She did it, Ben repeated softly, his heart full of gratitude and awe. Through his window, he could see camera flashes starting to light up the dark street. But for the first time in weeks, he wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. Truth had a way of setting everything right, even if the path there was painful. Emily had taught him that. And somewhere in the storm of media attention about to break over their small town, Ben knew that Grace, both the divine kind and his daughter beside him, would see them through. The morning sun peeked through Ben's bedroom window, casting warm streaks across his worn quilt. His eyes were red from a sleepless night spent watching Emily's video confession play over and over on every news channel. His phone buzzed constantly on the nightstand, reporters, old customers, and townspeople all trying to reach him. Grace burst into his room, still in her pajamas, clutching her tablet. "Dad, look at this." She climbed onto his bed, careful not to jostle his back. "The whole internet is talking about Emily's video. Everyone's sharing it." Ben adjusted himself slowly, his back protesting the movement. The pain seemed a little more bearable this morning, though maybe that was just his lifted spirits. "What are they saying, sweetheart?" "They're calling you a hero again." Grace's eyes sparkled with pride. "And they're angry at the governor for lying about Emily. Look at all these comments defending you." The local news station's website filled her screen. Below Emily's video, thousands of supportive messages flooded the comments section. Ben's phone rang again. This time it was Pastor Will. "Brother Ben," Will's warm voice carried through the speaker. "Have you checked your bank account this morning?" "No. Why?" Ben reached for his own tablet, pulling up his banking app. "The community's rallying behind you. That fundraiser we started last month, it's gone viral overnight. People are donating from all over the country." Ben's eyes widened as he saw the balance. What had been a few $100s in donations had multiplied into tens of thousands. His vision blurred with tears. I don't know what to say, Will." "Say thank you to the Lord and accept His provision." Will replied gently. "You've spent your life helping others. Now it's time to let others help you." The morning news played in the background as Ben and Grace ate breakfast. The anchor's voice filled their small kitchen. In a stunning development, Governor Michael Dawson has called an emergency press conference for 9 a.m. today, following his sister Emily Dawson's viral video revelation. Grace checked her watch. "That's in 20 minutes, Dad." They moved to the living room, where Ben eased himself into his recliner. The news showed the steps of the state capitol, where reporters gathered in anticipation. Right on time, Governor Dawson appeared at the podium, looking more human than Ben had ever seen him. Gone was the polished politician. In his place stood a man who appeared to have aged overnight. "My fellow Tennesseans," the governor began, his voice thick with emotion. "I come before you today not as your governor, but as a brother who has failed his family and as a man who must right his wrongs." Grace gripped Ben's hand as they listened. 20 years ago, I made a choice that haunts me to this day. When my sister Emily needed me most, I chose political expediency over family loyalty. I convinced myself I was protecting both of us, but in truth, I was protecting only myself." The governor paused, swallowing hard. "I've watched Mr. Ben Carter demonstrate more courage and compassion in one night than I have shown in 2 decades. Ben felt Grace's hand tighten around his. "Today, I publicly apologize to my sister Emily, whose strength and recovery deserve celebration, not shame. I apologize to Mr. Carter, whose integrity I questioned and whose reputation I allowed to be tarnished. And I apologize to the people of Tennessee, who deserve better from their leader." Tears streamed down Grace's cheeks as she hugged her father. "It's over, Dad. It's finally over." The phone rang again. Ben's garage manager, Tom. "Boss, you won't believe this. The appointment book is filling up faster than I can write." Everyone wants their car fixed by the hero mechanic with a heart of gold. Their words, not mine. Throughout the morning, the good news kept flowing. The hospital called to confirm that all his medical bills had been paid in full. The bank reached out about restructuring his mortgage payments. Local businesses offered support and partnerships. Around noon, a familiar black SUV pulled into the driveway, but this time it wasn't threatening. The governor's aide stepped out with an official letter of apology and a substantial check for damages to Ben's reputation, but it was the handwritten note attached that caught Ben's attention. Mr. Carter, Patton. Some debts can never be repaid, but I hope this helps restore what my pride destroyed. Michael Dawson. Grace spent the afternoon reading supportive messages to her father from her classmates and their parents. The bullying had transformed into admiration overnight. Sarah's mom wants to know if she can bring dinner tonight, Grace said, scrolling through her phone. And Mr. Johnson from church is offering to help at the garage until your back heals. As the day wound down, Ben sat on his front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The same porch where he and Emily had shared so many conversations. His back still ached, but his heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. The evening air carried the scent of approaching spring. Ben closed his eyes, remembering Emily's smile, her gentle way with Grace, how she'd brought light back into their home without even trying. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the chirping crickets. "Thank you for showing us that even our darkest moments can lead to light." He paused, taking in the peaceful moment. "And Lord, if it's your will, bring Emily home to us." The porch swing creaked softly in the evening breeze, its empty space beside him, a reminder of absence and hope intertwined. Somewhere out there, Emily was free from hiding at last. Ben sat quietly, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the Tennessee sky. Ben gripped the therapy room's padded table, his knuckles white, but his face determined. The young physical therapist, Sarah, guided him through another stretch. "That's it, Mr. Carter. Just ease into it," she encouraged, supporting his lower back. "You've made incredible progress these past weeks." The pain was different now, not the sharp, stabbing agony of before, but more like a dull ache that reminded him of work left to do. He breathed deeply, the way they'd taught him. "Remember when you first came in?" Sarah asked, helping him straighten up. "You could barely walk without the walker. Now look at you." Ben managed a small smile. "The Lord provides," he said softly, thinking of all the prayers that had carried him this far. After the session, Ben walked, not shuffled, to his truck. His movements were still careful, but there was a newfound confidence in his stride. The autumn air felt crisp and clean in his lungs. When he pulled into the garage's parking lot, he had to blink twice. A small crowd had gathered, with Pastor Will's tall frame standing out among them. Grace was there too, waving excitedly. "Dad!" she called out as he parked. "Look what everyone's doing." Ben stepped out slowly, taking in the scene. Several men from church were pressure washing the garage's weathered exterior. Others were replacing the old sign's burnt-out bulbs. Mrs. Henderson from the diner was setting up folding tables with coffee and donuts. Pastor Will approached, his weathered face creased in a warm smile. The community wanted to help Ben. No arguing allowed. Ben's throat tightened as he watched Tommy Miller, his old high school classmate, carefully painting over the graffiti that had appeared during the scandal. The cruel words about Emily and him disappeared under fresh coats of white. "I don't know what to say," Ben managed. "You don't have to say anything," Pastor Will replied, squeezing his shoulder. "Just accept it. Sometimes grace comes with a paintbrush and a pressure washer." Grace bounced over, her eyes bright with excitement. "Dad, wait till you see what we're planning. Pastor Will helped me organize a fundraiser for this Saturday. The whole town's talking about it." She pulled out hand-drawn flyers from her backpack. Ben's heart swelled as he looked at them. They showed his garage transformed into a gathering place, with the words "Community Car Wash" and "Bake Sale" written in Grace's artistic style. "Your daughter's quite the organizer," Pastor Will chuckled. "She's got the women's auxiliary making pies, the youth group washing cars, and even convinced the mayor to make an appearance." Ben watched as Grace hurried off to help Mrs. Henderson arrange the donuts. His daughter's resilience amazed him, how she'd weathered the storm of gossip and emerged stronger, more determined to help others. Throughout the day, more people stopped by. Old customers who'd abandoned the garage during the scandal returned with sheepish apologies and new repair orders. Ben accepted them with quiet grace, understanding that fear and judgment could cloud anyone's heart. By late afternoon, the garage looked transformed. Fresh paint gleamed in the sun, the new sign sparkled, and the waiting room had been thoroughly cleaned and reorganized. Ben's back twinged as he helped move a few lighter items, but he knew his limits now. "Take it easy there," Pastor Will cautioned, watching him closely. "God gave us neighbors for a reason." Ben nodded, stepping back to let others do the heavy lifting. It was a lesson he'd learned the hard way. Accepting help didn't make him weak. It made him human. As the sun began to set, Grace called everyone together for pizza. Her treat, she insisted, from her saved allowance. They gathered in the newly cleaned waiting room, sharing stories and laughter. "Remember when Ben fixed my tractor at midnight during harvest season?" old Mr. Johnson recalled. "Didn't charge me extra neither. Or the time he helped my Katie change her tire in that snowstorm," Mrs. Peterson added. "Wouldn't take a dime for it." Ben listened, humbled by their memories of kindnesses he'd nearly forgotten. All those small moments of helping others, they'd come back to him now, multiplied. After the impromptu celebration wound down and the last helpers left, Ben sat in his office chair, surrounded by the fresh paint smell and renewed hope. Grace was gathering her things when they heard the mail truck outside. "I'll get it," she called, darting out to the mailbox. She returned moments later, holding several envelopes. Bills, advertisement. "Oh, wait." She paused, holding up a cream-colored envelope. "This one's different." Ben took it carefully. The postmark read Nashville, but there was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line of elegant handwriting. "I'll be home soon." His hands trembled slightly as he read those 4 words again. Grace peered over his shoulder, her eyes widening with recognition. "Dad," she whispered, "is that from?" Ben carefully folded the note, tucking it into his shirt pocket, right over his heart. "Yes, sweetheart, I believe it is." The late summer breeze carried the scent of barbecue and fresh-cut grass across Miller's field. Red and white checkered tablecloths dotted the lawn, weighted down with homemade dishes and mason jars filled with wildflowers. String lights crisscrossed overhead, though they wouldn't twinkle until dusk. Ben adjusted the collar of his clean blue shirt, his Sunday best as Grace called it, and watched his daughter arrange artwork on display easels. She'd organized this charity picnic with an enthusiasm that reminded him so much of her mother. The whole town had pitched in, turning it into a proper celebration. "Looking good, Ben," Pastor Will called out, carrying a stack of folding chairs. "Back giving you any trouble today?" "Not much," Ben replied, and meant it. The therapy was working wonders, even if his wallet felt the strain. "Need a hand with those?" "You stay put," the pastor warned with a gentle smile. "Doctor's orders. Besides, you've done enough heavy lifting for one lifetime." The afternoon sun painted everything golden as townspeople began arriving. Mrs. Peterson brought her famous peach cobbler. The high school band set up near the makeshift dance floor. Even folks who'd canceled repair jobs weeks ago came by to shake Ben's hand, their eyes apologetic. Grace bounced between groups, her ponytail swinging, making sure everyone signed the giant thank you card she'd created. Ben watched her with pride swelling in his chest. She'd grown so much through all this, not just taller, but stronger in spirit. "Dad!" she called suddenly, freezing in place. Her eyes fixed on something behind him. Ben turned, and his heart skipped a beat. Emily stood at the edge of the field, wearing a simple sundress and nervous smile. Her hair caught the sunlight like honey, and she held a canvas under one arm. For a moment, no one moved. Then Grace ran forward, launching herself into Emily's arms. "You came back!" Emily's laugh carried across the grass, bright and clear as a bell. "Of course I did, sweetheart. I promised, didn't I?" The murmuring crowd parted as Emily walked toward the center of the gathering, Grace practically bouncing beside her. Ben found himself rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by the sight of her. She stopped in front of the assembled townspeople, her courage visible in the straightness of her spine despite her trembling hands. "I owe you all an apology," she began, her voice steady but humble. "And more than that, my deepest thanks. When I crashed on that dark road, I was running away from my past. But God had other plans." She glanced at Ben, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "He sent me an angel with a tire iron and a bad back." Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. Ben felt his cheeks warm. "This town," Emily continued, "you didn't just save my life that night. You showed me what community means, what faith looks like in action. Even when the truth about me came out, even when it would have been easier to turn away. She unfolded the canvas she'd brought, revealing a painting of the town square at sunrise. You gave me a home. Mayor Thompson stepped forward, clearing his throat. Speaking of home, Miss Dawson, or should I say, Miss Dawson Carter Foundation? We just received word about your brother's office. Emily nodded, composing herself. Yes. The governor has authorized a substantial grant to build a recovery and support center right here in town. A place where people who are hurting, whether from addiction, loss, or just hard times, can find hope and healing. She looked at Ben again. We're naming it after the man who taught me that sometimes the strongest act of faith is simply helping someone up when they've fallen. Applause erupted across the field. Grace hugged her father's arm, beaming. Pastor Will wiped his eyes, not so subtly with his handkerchief. As the sun began to set, the string lights flickered to life overhead like earthbound stars. The band struck up a slow melody, sweet and gentle as a prayer. Emily approached Ben, her steps hesitant but purposeful. May I have this dance? She asked softly. My doctor says it's good therapy. Ben felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside, a place that had been quiet for so long. My doctor says the same thing, he replied, taking her offered hand. They moved slowly together on the makeshift dance floor, mindful of his healing back. Emily's head rested lightly against his shoulder, and Ben could feel her heartbeat matching time with the music. At the edge of the dance floor, Grace watched them, tears streaming freely down her smiling face. In her hands, she clutched her sketchbook, already open to a fresh page, ready to capture this moment when broken things began to heal. The string lights twinkled overhead like stars scattered across an evening sky, blessing the dancers below with their gentle light. Emily stood before the town council, her hands steady as she unrolled the architectural plans across the wooden table. Sunlight streamed through the old courthouse windows, catching dust motes in its beams. Her voice carried clear and strong, so different from the frightened woman Ben had pulled from that wreck months ago. The center will have 3 main wings, she explained, pointing to the blueprint. Vocational training here, counseling services there, and a community space in the middle. We want it to feel welcoming, not institutional. Ben sat in the back row, his chest tight with pride. He watched council members lean forward, caught up in Emily's vision. Even old Mr. Harrison, who'd voted against every new building proposal since 1982, nodded along. And the funding? Mayor Thompson asked, adjusting her reading glasses. The governor's office has committed to matching all local donations, Emily answered. Plus, we've received grants from 3 recovery foundations. She paused, glancing back at Ben. And Mr. Carter has offered his expertise for the vocational program. Ben's face warmed. He'd been hesitant when Emily first suggested it, teaching young mechanics who needed second chances. But something about the idea felt right, like putting tools back where they belonged. After the meeting, they walked together down Main Street. The autumn air carried hints of wood smoke and falling leaves. Emily's heels clicked against the sidewalk as she clutched her folder of papers. You were amazing in there, Ben said softly. Emily shook her head, but smiled. I just showed them what's possible when people believe in second chances. She reached for his hand. Like you did for me. They stopped at Carter's Auto and Repair, where Grace was helping sort applications for the training program. The garage looked different now, cleaner, more organized. A fresh coat of paint covered the walls, and new signs advertised both auto repair and the upcoming center's vocational classes. Look at these, Dad. Grace called, waving papers. 3 veterans, 2 single parents, someone in recovery. Her eyes shone with purpose. They all want to learn from you. Ben moved carefully. His back still reminded him to be mindful, and sat beside his daughter. Each application told a story of struggle and hope. He remembered his own dark days after losing his wife, how work had given him focus when grief threatened to overwhelm. We'll need more tools, he mused, making mental calculations, and proper workstations for teaching. Already handled, Emily said, pulling out another set of papers. The equipment companies offered discounts when they heard about the program. And look, she spread out a detailed floor plan of the garage. We can fit 6 training stations without crowding the regular repair bays. Later that afternoon, they visited the construction site, an empty lot where the old mill once stood. Tractors had already cleared the ground, and survey stakes marked the foundation lines. Emily walked the perimeter, her artist's eye seeing past the dirt to something greater. The counseling wing will face east, she explained, pointing, so the morning light fills the waiting room, and the community space will have big windows overlooking the river. She turned to Ben. What do you think about adding a small art studio? Grace mentioned wanting to lead therapy sessions someday. Ben's throat tightened. He remembered finding Grace's drawings after her mother died, how art had helped her heal. Now she talked about helping other kids do the same. The construction foreman approached with hard hats and ceremonial shovels. Ready for the official groundbreaking? He asked. Emily handed Ben a shovel, their fingers brushing. Together, they stood side by side, Grace between them, as Mayor Thompson made a short speech about community and healing. The small crowd that gathered included Pastor Will, regular customers from the garage, and even a few of Emily's old recovery friends from Nashville. On three, the mayor announced. Ben gripped the shovel handle, feeling the familiar twinge in his back. But this time, it wasn't from strain or worry. This pain came with promise, with purpose. 1, 2, 3. 3 shovels broke earth together, and the crowd applauded. Grace hugged them both, dirt already smudging her new dress. Emily wiped happy tears from her cheeks, then straightened up slowly, surveying the land that would soon help others find their way back to hope. His back twinged again, but he smiled. Some aches were worth bearing, especially when they came from planting seeds of grace. Grace's hands trembled as she held the thick envelope from Vanderbilt University. The morning sun poured through the kitchen window, warming the worn linoleum floor where she stood frozen. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Well? Ben asked from his seat at the breakfast table, his coffee going cold. You gonna open it, sweetheart? Emily sat beside him, squeezing his hand under the table. She'd helped Grace with her application essays, spending countless evenings reviewing drafts and sharing stories about how art had saved her own life during recovery. Grace took a deep breath and tore open the envelope. Her eyes scanned the first line, and suddenly, tears spilled down her cheeks. I got in, she whispered, then louder. I got in. Ben stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. His back twinged, but he ignored it, wrapping his daughter in a bear hug that lifted her feet off the ground. That's my girl. I knew you could do it. Emily clapped her hands together, her own eyes glistening. The art therapy program? Grace nodded frantically, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. Full acceptance into the pre-therapy track. They loved my portfolio. The one you helped me put together. Emily rose and joined their hug, creating a small circle of joy in the morning light. Those paintings came from your heart, Grace. I just helped you arrange them. Later that afternoon, Emily and Grace sat on the back porch swing, looking through the acceptance package together. The spring breeze carried the scent of Emily's newly planted garden, her latest project in making their house feel more like home. See here? Emily pointed to a course listing. Introduction to Therapeutic Techniques. That's where you'll learn the foundations of using art to heal trauma. Her voice softened. Just like you helped heal mine, even though you didn't know you were doing it. Grace looked up, surprised. What do you mean? Those afternoons you spent painting with me when I first started staying here? When the whole town was whispering about my past? Emily smiled gently. Your innocence, your pure love of creating, it reminded me why I fell in love with art in the first place. Before the addiction, before the shame. Inside, Ben stood at the kitchen sink, watching them through the window. His chest felt tight with emotion as he observed his daughter, no longer the little girl who'd lost her mother, but a young woman ready to help others heal through art. Just like Emily had helped heal their family, Pastor Will's words from that desperate night months ago echoed in his mind. Sometimes God's greatest gifts come disguised as our darkest moments. The screen door creaked as Emily and Grace came back inside. Ben turned, trying to hide his red-rimmed eyes, but Grace caught him anyway. Dad, are you okay? He cleared his throat. Just thinking about how scared I was. His voice cracked slightly. After your mama passed, after my back gave out, I was so afraid I couldn't give you a future. Couldn't send you to college? Couldn't. Grace wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest like she used to do as a little girl. You gave me everything I needed, Dad. You showed me what real strength looks like. Emily moved to the stove, wiping her own eyes. I think this calls for a celebration dinner. Grace's favorite? Lasagna? With extra cheese? Grace perked up, still holding on to her father. Is there any other way? Emily laughed, already pulling ingredients from the cupboard. She'd memorized their kitchen's layout months ago. knew exactly where Ben kept the pasta and which drawer held the pot holders. They worked together preparing dinner, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of family. Grace set the table with the good plates, the ones that had belonged to her mother. Ben snuck bites of cheese when Emily wasn't looking, making Grace giggle like she was 6 instead of 16. The kitchen filled with warm aromas and warmer laughter. Emily told stories about her own college days, the good memories before things went wrong. Ben shared tales of Grace's childhood art projects, including the time she'd painted the cat blue. "That poor cat," Grace groaned, but she was smiling. "He never trusted me with paint again." "Smart cat." Ben chuckled, passing the garlic bread. Emily raised her glass of sparkling cider. They never kept alcohol in the house, out of respect for her recovery. To Grace Carter, future art therapist. And to new beginnings. To new beginnings, Ben and Grace echoed, their glasses clinking in the golden evening light. Grace looked around the table at her father's proud smile and Emily's glowing face, and felt her heart could burst. Just months ago, their lives had been so different. Her father broken and worried, Emily lost and hiding, their future uncertain. Now here they sat, sharing lasagna and dreams, laughter bouncing off the walls like music. The acceptance letter sat propped against the centerpiece, a promise of tomorrow made possible by yesterday's courage. "More garlic bread?" Emily offered, already reaching for the basket. "Always," Ben and Grace answered in unison, then burst out laughing again. Thunder rolled across the Tennessee hills as rain drummed against the windows of Ben's modest home. The power had gone out 10 minutes ago, leaving Ben and Emily sitting at the kitchen table in the soft glow of emergency candles. The flickering light cast dancing shadows on the walls, reminiscent of another stormy night not so long ago. Ben shifted in his chair, his back only giving a slight twinge now, a reminder of how far he'd come. Emily wrapped her hands around a steaming mug of chamomile tea, her eyes distant as lightning illuminated the kitchen in brief, bright flashes. "Funny how things work out," Ben said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "A night just like this one changed everything." Emily nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I was so scared that night," she admitted. "Not just of the crash, but of everything I was running from. My brother, my past, myself." Another crack of thunder made her jump slightly. Ben reached across the table and covered her hand with his own, work-roughened fingers, gentle against her skin. "I remember seeing your headlights coming around that curve," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was crying so hard I could barely see the road. Then everything just spun out of control." "God put me on that road for a reason," Ben said, his quiet faith steady as always, though I sure didn't know it at the time. Emily smiled faintly. "You never asked why I was running that night. Figured you'd tell me when you were ready." The candlelight caught the tears gathering in Emily's eyes. "My brother? He just told me I needed to stay hidden, that my recovery wasn't convincing enough yet, that I was still a liability." She drew a shaky breath. 7 years sober, and it still wasn't enough for him. Ben squeezed her hand. "You're not hiding anymore." "No, but sometimes," Emily's voice caught, "sometimes I'm terrified I'll slip, that the darkness will pull me back in, that I'll disappoint everyone, you, Grace, the people at the recovery center who look up to me now." Outside, the rain intensified, sheets of water cascading down the windows. Ben stood carefully, his movements measured but much stronger than months ago. He moved to Emily's side of the table and sat in the chair next to her. "Look at me," he said gently. Emily raised her eyes to meet his, vulnerability plain on her face in the candlelight. "You're not alone anymore," Ben told her, his voice firm but kind. "You've got a family now. Me, Grace, Pastor Will, this whole community. We're all here to hold you steady." "But what if faith isn't about never being afraid?" Ben interrupted softly. "It's about knowing who to turn to when you are, and now you've got us to remind you of that." Emily leaned her head against his shoulder, and Ben wrapped an arm around her. They sat like that for a while, listening to the storm rage outside while staying safe and warm in their circle of candlelight. "I never thought I'd find this," Emily whispered after a while. "Find what?" "Peace, purpose, a real home." She lifted her head to look at him. "When you pulled me from that wreck, you didn't just save my life, Ben. You showed me what true faith looks like. Not perfect, but persistent. Not flashy, but faithful." Ben felt his throat tighten with emotion. "God's grace works like that sometimes." Shows up in the strangest places, even a broken-down mechanic with a bad back. Emily laughs softly, wiping her eyes. A mechanic who lifts wrecked cars and wrecked people. The storm's fury began to ease, the thunder growing more distant. Gradually, the rain softened to a gentle patter against the windows. A warm glow began to fill the kitchen as the clouds parted, letting in the evening Sunday. "Look," Emily gasped, standing and moving to the window. Ben joined her, his breath catching at the sight. Two perfect arcs of color stretched across the clearing sky, a double rainbow painted against the departing storm clouds. The colors were vivid and bright, seeming close enough to touch. Emily slipped her hand into Ben's, her eyes shining with wonder. "Maybe that's God's signature," she said softly. They stood together at the window, watching nature's light show, while the candles burned steadily behind them, small flames of hope that had guided them through the dark. The morning sun painted the Tennessee hills in hues of gold as crowds gathered outside the newly constructed Carter Dawson Family Center for Recovery and Hope. The red brick building stood proud against the backdrop of autumn trees, its fresh paint gleaming and its windows sparkling in the crisp October air. Ben Carter adjusted his tie, a rare sight for the mechanic who usually preferred work shirts and grease-stained jeans. His back felt strong today, though the memory of pain lingered like a distant echo. Grace stood beside him, practically bouncing with excitement in her new blue dress, while Emily smoothed down her cream-colored blazer for the 100th time. "You look perfect," Ben whispered to Emily, noticing her nervous fidgeting. She gave him a grateful smile. "I never thought I'd stand next to my brother in public again, let alone like this." The crowd buzzed with anticipation as Governor Michael Dawson's motorcade pulled up. Secret Service agents scanned the area while the governor emerged from his black SUV, looking distinguished in his tailored suit. But today, there was something different about him, a softness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He approached Ben, Emily, and Grace with measured steps, but his usual political mask had slipped away. "Ready?" he asked Emily, offering his arm. Emily took a deep breath and linked her arm through his. "Ready, big brother." The makeshift stage held a simple podium and a wide red ribbon stretched across the center's entrance. Rows of folding chairs faced the building, filled with townspeople who'd supported Ben through everything. Pastor Will sat in the front row, beaming with pride. The governor stepped up to the microphone, clearing his throat. The crowd fell silent. "Today," he began, his voice carrying across the gathering, "we're not just opening a building, we're opening our hearts." He paused, looking at his sister. "For too many years, I thought protecting my image meant hiding what I saw as imperfect. I was wrong." Emily squeezed Ben's hand as her brother continued. "My sister Emily taught me that real strength isn't about appearing flawless. It's about having the courage to face our flaws and help others face theirs." The governor's voice cracked slightly. And Ben Carter, a man who had every reason to look the other way that stormy night, showed me what true character looks like. He didn't just save my sister's life. He saved her soul, and in doing so, he helped save mine. Grace wiped a tear from her cheek as scattered applause broke out. "This center," the governor gestured to the building, "will be a place where people can find what Emily found, hope, healing, and a second chance. Where they can learn what Ben taught me, that compassion isn't weakness, it's the greatest strength we possess." The crowd's applause grew louder. Old Mrs. Henderson from the diner wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. Even some of the reporters dabbed at their faces with tissue paper. "In a moment, we'll cut this ribbon. But first," the governor turned to face Ben and Emily directly. "I want to thank you both. Emily, you showed me that redemption isn't about hiding our scars, but about using them to help others heal. And Ben, you proved that sometimes the greatest acts of faith happen on dark roads when nobody's watching." He stepped away from the podium and walked to where the giant scissors waited. Emily moved to join him, and Ben followed with Grace. "Would you all do the honors?" the governor asked, holding out the scissors. Together, they gripped the handles, the governor and Emily on one side, Ben and Grace on the other. The bright red ribbon rippled in the morning breeze. 3, 2, 1. The crowd counted down. The scissors sliced through the ribbon with a satisfying snip. Cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. Camera flashes popped like lightning. The governor hugged his sister tight, no longer caring who saw his tears. As the applause continued, Ben felt Emily's hand slip into his left hand while Grace took his right. They stood for a moment, looking at the open doors where sunlight streamed through the glass panels, creating patterns on the new floor inside. Then, together, they walked through those doors, stepping into the warm light. Their footsteps echoed in the pristine lobby where new beginnings waited. Sunlight poured through the windows, filling the space with golden promise. The town's mechanic, the governor's sister, and the daughter who had brought them all together, hand in hand, they crossed the threshold into something beautiful. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across Ben Carter's front lawn, turning everything it touched to molten gold. From his favorite wooden rocking chair on the porch, the same chair his father had carved by hand 30 years ago, he watched the light dance through the autumn leaves, creating a living kaleidoscope of amber and crimson that shifted with every gentle breeze. The old oak tree in their front yard stood like a guardian, its branches heavy with the weight of changing seasons. Emily sat in the matching chair beside him, her weathered sketch pad balanced on her knee, pencil moving with practiced ease across the paper. She'd filled dozens of these books over the past months, capturing moments of grace in simple lines and shadows. Grace sprawled on the porch steps, her dark hair catching glints of sunshine like threads of copper. A thermos of lemonade at her side, and her latest college brochure spread open before her. Ben's back felt stronger now, though some mornings still reminded him of that rainy night 6 months ago. The physical therapy had been grueling, but worth every painful session. The ache had become more like an old friend than an enemy, a reminder of how one moment of choosing compassion over comfort could change everything. Dr. Martinez had been amazed at his progress, calling it nothing short of remarkable. "Look at that light," Emily murmured, her pencil pausing as she tilted her head toward the western sky. "It's like God's showing off, painting the whole world just for us." The golden rays streamed through the maple trees lining their street, casting everything in warm honey tones that made even their modest neighborhood feel like something from a fairy tale. Emily had taught him to notice these details, the way light transformed the ordinary into something sacred. Grace turned to look at them, her face soft with contentment, eyes bright with the kind of peace Ben hadn't seen in her since before Sarah's diagnosis. "Remember when we used to sit out here and barely say a word?" she asked, setting down her brochure. "Those first months after Mom died? Now I can't imagine the quiet without all our chatter." Ben smiled, his throat tightening with the memory of those darker evenings after Sarah passed. He and Grace would sit on this same porch, watching sunsets in silence, both afraid to speak their grief aloud for fear it might swallow them whole. The porch had been their sanctuary, then a place to hide from a world that felt too bright, too loud, too demanding. Now it felt more like a throne, a place to witness daily miracles unfolding in the ordinary moments. "Your mother would have loved this," Ben said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Grace's eyes met his, understanding flowing between them like a current. They'd learned to speak Sarah's name without drowning in sorrow. She always said sunset was God's way of reminding us that even endings can be beautiful, that every day deserves a proper goodbye. Emily reached over and squeezed his hand, her fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. Her touch still sent warmth through him, like that first sip of coffee on a cold morning, like coming home after a long journey. She'd been staying in their guest room more often lately, her brother's imposing mansion feeling less and less like home compared to their modest house with its creaky steps, weathered paint, and rooms filled with laughter. "I was thinking about that night," Emily said, setting her sketchbook carefully aside. "When you found me in that wreck, trapped and bleeding and so lost, I didn't even want to be saved." She paused, watching a bright red cardinal land gracefully on the bird feeder Grace had painted last spring, its cheerful yellow sunflowers now faded but still welcoming. "I was running from everything, my brother, my past, the person I thought I'd become. I genuinely believed I was beyond redemption. Nobody's beyond saving," Ben replied, the words coming naturally now, born from months of hard-won wisdom. His faith had grown stronger through all of this, like a muscle tested by weight and proven capable of bearing more than he'd ever imagined possible. Sometimes we just need someone willing to get their hands dirty, showing us the way back to the light. Grace stood up and stretched, her long shadow falling across the porch boards like a sundial marking time. At 16, she was becoming the woman Sarah had dreamed she'd be: strong, compassionate, unafraid of her own dreams. "I'm going to make some hot chocolate," she announced, "the real kind, with the marshmallows. Want some?" They nodded eagerly, and she disappeared inside, letting the screen door bang softly behind her in that familiar way that meant home. The sound echoed across their little piece of Tennessee heaven, 3 acres of land that had witnessed both heartbreak and healing, where broken dreams had been carefully mended with faith and patience. Ben thought about his garage, now thriving beyond his wildest expectations. 2 new apprentices worked alongside him, learning not just the trade, but the dignity that came with honest work and second chances. Marcus was a veteran struggling with nightmares, and Tommy was a young man who'd lost his way after his father died. Both had found more than employment, they'd found purpose. The community had rallied around Ben's story, bringing their business and their trust. The Carter Dawson Center downtown helped dozens of people each week now. Emily's art therapy program had become so popular, they'd had to expand into the building next door. She worked with trauma survivors, addiction recovery patients, and anyone whose soul needed healing through creativity. Watching her guide broken people toward hope had shown Ben what true redemption looked like. "You know what Pastor Will told me yesterday?" Ben said, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon, painting the sky in broad strokes of orange and pink. The old preacher had become even more precious to them through these months of change. He said sometimes God doesn't give us the strength to move mountains. He gives us the strength to lift someone else's wreck instead. And that makes all the difference. Emily smiled, tears gathering in her eyes like dewdrops catching light. And in lifting others, we somehow find ourselves lifted too. It's the strangest miracle. The screen door creaked open again as Grace returned, carefully balancing 3 steaming mugs topped with clouds of marshmallows. She'd chosen their special mugs, the ones Sarah had painted during her last Christmas, each one unique and precious. Grace handed them around with the reverence the moment deserved, then settled back on the steps, wrapping her hands around her cup like it held liquid comfort. The rich chocolate-sweet aroma mixed with the evening air, mingling with the scent of wood smoke drifting from chimneys down the valley. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour, its bronze voice carrying across the peaceful neighborhood like a blessing. "Dad," Grace said suddenly, her voice thoughtful, "remember how scared you were after the accident, when you couldn't work and the bills kept coming?" She turned to face him fully, her expression gentle but direct. "You thought you were going to lose everything that mattered." Ben nodded slowly, his chest tightening with the memory of those dark days when fear had gnawed at his gut like a hungry wolf. He'd lain awake nights calculating and recalculating, watching their small savings disappear while his back screamed and his pride bled. "I was terrified," he admitted. "Thought I'd fail you the way I sometimes felt I'd failed your mother. But look what we gained instead," Grace continued, gesturing broadly to Emily, to their home glowing in the sunset, to the deep peace that now wrapped around them like the softest blanket. Her voice carried wonder, as if she was still amazed by the transformation. One act of kindness on a rainy night, and God turned our whole world upside down in the best possible way. Emily leaned forward in her chair, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's what faith really is, isn't it? Not knowing how things will work out, but trusting that love finds a way. Believing that broken things can be made beautiful again." Ben watched the sun kiss the horizon, painting the entire sky in magnificent strokes of purple and gold. The clouds looked like brushstrokes from a master artist, each one placed with divine intention. He thought about that rainy night that felt like a lifetime ago, how his hands had gripped that tire iron with desperate strength, how his back had screamed in protest as he lifted the twisted metal. He'd acted on pure instinct then, driven by something deeper than thought or calculation, driven by love itself. The first stars began to appear overhead, twinkling like distant promises written in light. Venus hung low and bright, the evening star his mother used to point out when he was Grace's age. A gentle breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves and applewood smoke from somewhere down the valley, along with the faint sound of children playing in a neighbor's yard. Ben felt the familiar weight of gratitude settle in his chest, warm and solid as a stone heated by summer Sunday. This feeling had become his constant companion, not the desperate gratitude of someone who'd narrowly escaped disaster, but the deep, abiding thankfulness of someone who'd learned to see miracles in the mundane. "Sometimes," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper as he watched the last rays of sunlight paint their humble world in glory, "we think we're lifting someone's wreck just to save them from harm. But maybe," he paused, searching for words adequate to the mystery, "maybe God lets us lift it so He can save us too. Maybe that's how grace really works, through our willingness to get our hands dirty for love." Emily reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand again, her fingers warm and sure. Grace scooted closer on the steps, leaning against his knee, the way she used to when she was small, and the world felt too big to navigate alone. The golden light washed over their home one final time, turning the weathered clapboard siding to honey, making the windows flame like amber, transforming their simple front porch into something that felt touched by heaven itself. Peace settled over the three of them like a benediction, like the closing notes of a hymn sung by angels. Ben closed his eyes and breathed deeply, tasting the sweetness of chocolate and the crispness of autumn air. Somewhere inside his chest, in the place where his deepest fears used to live, he felt only stillness now. Not the absence of feeling, but the presence of something infinitely more powerful than fear. The quiet certainty that love wins, that broken people can heal, and that sometimes the very thing that threatens to destroy us becomes the foundation for something more beautiful than we dared imagine. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky painted in soft pastels that would soon give way to night. But Ben felt no sadness in the ending of this day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose kindness over comfort, new chances to lift each other's burdens. As the first stars began to shine in earnest, Ben opened his eyes and smiled. Faith and hope had been restored in the quiet miracle of another day, ending well, and in the promise of all the dawns yet to come. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ben Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.